Good afternoon and welcome to the Committee on Public Housing. At this time, we ask if you can please place phones on vibrate or silent mode. Thank you, Chair. We are ready to begin.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today's hearing on the city's fiscal 2024 preliminary budget and the New York City Housing Authority's 5-year operating and capital plans for 2023 to 2027. I am Councilmember Alexa Aviles, the chair of the Committee on Public Housing, and I would like to acknowledge that I'm joined today by Councilmember Gail Brewer and Councilmember Chio Say. Is Councilmember online? Okay. NYCHA has operated the largest public housing program in the nation for over 75 years, providing affordable housing to over 530,000 low and middle income New York City residents through both the Section 9 public housing and through Section 8 voucher programs. While NYCHA continues to be a precious and critical resource in an increasingly unaffordable city, long-standing divestment and federal and state city defunding of public housing, coupled with organizational mismanagement, has resulted in the deterioration of the public housing stock. For years, tenants have reported health and safety issues in their homes, ranging from lack of heat to unresolved mold issues, pest infestations, lead-based paint hazards, elevator outages, and leaky roofs, just to name some of the long-standing issues. As we know, NYCHA's long-standing capital needs exceeds $40 billion. In 2019, these health and safety issues came to a head. To avoid a takeover, the city signed a settlement agreement that placed NYCHA under the federal monitorship that requires it improve its operations across key pillar areas like heating, elevators, and mold, reinvest in its properties, and become more accountable to both the residents and the federal government. This monitor requires NYCHA to remediate living conditions at the development citywide by specific deadlines. On some of these key metrics, NYCHA has made improvements, and on others, like elevator repairs, the authority is desperately behind. NYCHA's 5-year capital plan totals $8.6 billion, with $3.5 billion in city funds. The city's capital commitment, as we've discerned, for this fiscal 24 is only $700 million, half of what the federal monies support, and is paltry compared to what the city's commitment should be and what the need is capitally. Meanwhile, NYCHA has been working to implement the Permanent Affordability and Commitment Together, or PACT, which converts Section 9 public housing to project-based Section 8 and leverages public-private partnerships to secure funding to complete comprehensive repairs. So far, about 30,000 authorized residents across 58 developments have been converted to PACT, almost half of the NYCHA's goal of 62,000 apartments. And last summer, the state approved a new financing model for the authority, the Public Housing Preservation Trust. Under this strategy, NYCHA would transfer development to the trust, which can borrow against rent revenues and federal funding in a way that NYCHA presently cannot. According to NYCHA, the trust could borrow $3.4 billion for repairs and capital improvements for 25,000 units. In addition to the departure of the former NYCHA CEO, NYCHA Chair Greg Russ, there is still no board seated for the trust, and no residents have yet voted to join the trust. And lastly, at a recently released report from the Independent Budget Office, noted real concerns around some of the financial assumptions that were made in order to make the trust workable. We are deeply concerned. On top of its well-known capital challenges, NYCHA's operating budget is now imperiled by ballooning tenant rental arrears. Tenant rental arrears totaled over $454 million at the end of 2022, up from $125 million in 2019. NYCHA is only collecting 65% of the rent charged over a 12-month period, and now there is less than 1 month of reserves remaining, indicating the clear impact of the pandemic. To date, NYCHA has submitted $120 million worth of emergency rental assistance program applications for 31,330 households. However, none, I repeat, none have been awarded due to state rules deprioritizing public housing residents. NYCHA is seeking $330 million from the state to close its arrears gap. Rental arrears helps explain why NYCHA's $4.4 billion operating budget for 2023 presents a $35 million deficit, even after a planned $65 million withdrawal from reserves. NYCHA's 2023 budget also cuts $25 million from central office contracts and reduces approximately 50% of the vacant central office positions. While NYCHA's overall vacancy rate is about 7%, its vacancy rate in core operations like heating, elevators, and safety is 17.5%. This is a problem. To get the repairs that tenants so desperately need, we need those kind of operational staff. The confluence of the budget, staffing, and operational challenges are visible in NYCHA's vacant unit readiness program. Due in part to a stricter new lead abatement standards, the average amount of time it took NYCHA to turn vacant apartments around for reoccupancy more than doubled in 2022, from 182 days in January 22 to 399 days in January 2023. However, the city administration cut the contracts for this program by 10% in the November 2022 plan, removing about $30.6 million over 4 years. Cutting this program to get units back online amidst a housing crisis is simply unconscionable for residents who both need to transfer and for some of the 250,000 of people that are waiting on NYCHA's waiting list. Our public housing is an incredible asset and a lifeline to hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who deserve healthy and safe homes. But its beleaguered finances present existential challenges. At today's hearing, we hope to better understand how NYCHA will stabilize its immediate finances, fix its physical conditions of its building under the Federal Monitors Agreement, reduce its bureaucracy, and engage and improve in services and job placements for residents. Problematic pegs like the vacant unit readiness cut requires closer scrutiny to ensure that the city is doing all it can for our public housing residents. Every level of government can and should do more. Each level is making active choices to defund NYCHA or minimally fund NYCHA. Every day, this choice imperils residents and some of our greatest social housing assets. I would like to thank the committee staff who've helped prepare for this hearing. Daniel Krupp, Jake Story, Chima, Connor Mealy, Jose Conde, Ricky Chawla, and my staff, Christina Botego, Edward Cerna, and James Niemeister. After NYCHA, we will hear from members of the public. I would like to remind everyone that would like to testify today to please fill out the witness slip with the Sergeant of Arms so that we can put you in the queue. I will now pass it to our committee counsel to swear in NYCHA leadership before turning it over for testimony. Thank you all for being here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
Chair Alexa Aviles, members of the Committee on Public Housing, other distinguished members of the City Council, NYCHA residents, community advocates, and members of the public, good afternoon. I am Lisa Bova Hyatt, NYCHA's Interim Chief Executive Officer. I am pleased to be joined by the Chief Operating Officer, Eva Trimble, Executive Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer, Anika Lescott-Martinez, Chief Asset and Capital Management Officer, Sean Mavani, and other members of NYCHA's team. Thank you for this opportunity to present the authority's adopted budget, which was approved by NYCHA's Board of Directors in December. I would also like to briefly discuss our efforts to transform this vital institution and improve residents' quality of life. There is considerable work underway to stabilize and strengthen the authority so that we can improve conditions at our developments and provide residents with the quality of life they deserve. We are focused intensely on this mission, and the stakes could not be higher. NYCHA is home to hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers, a significant resource of affordable housing in our city. However, in addition to the accumulating impacts of decades of federal government disinvestment, today we are contending with another serious challenge: rent arrears, which are growing at an alarming rate. Rent arrears now total $466 million across about 73,000 households, having nearly quadrupled since 2019, when arrears stood at $125 million. NYCHA is collecting only 64% of the rent owed over a 12-month period. HUD expects public housing authorities to collect 100% of the rent. NYCHA's primary mission is to keep families housed, and we launched a campaign to inform residents of the various ways they can get help with paying their rent, from one-time emergency assistance available from the city's Human Resources Administration to financial counseling opportunities from our partners, and we work with residents experiencing hardship. For instance, payment plans are possible, and residents experiencing a loss in income can have their rent reduced to as low as $0, a powerful demonstration of the vital safety net that public housing provides. In addition, we submitted $121 million worth of emergency rental assistance program applications to the state on behalf of more than 31,000 households. At this moment, though, there is no ERAP funding available for public housing residents. And at the same time, the NYCHA households with ERAP applications pending have amassed more than $240 million in arrears. To bring attention to these critical needs, we sent each state legislature data on rent arrears in their districts, as residents with subsidized rents have been granted the lowest priority for ERAP funding. Rent payments fund 1/3 of NYCHA's operating budget and are crucial to our operations. We rely on rent payments along with federal funding to maintain our developments, which are aging rapidly and have more than $40 billion in major capital needs. Without additional funding or an increase in rent payments beginning next year, NYCHA will have no choice but to significantly cut expenses and curtail repairs, including those related to the HUD agreement, which will have a real impact for our residents. We will discuss the ways we are mitigating the loss in rent payments later in our testimony. I would like to now take you through some specific information related to NYCHA's budget. For 2023, with expected operating revenues of about $4.378 billion and an expected $4.413 billion in operating expenses, we anticipate a year-end deficit of about $35 million. We believe we can close this gap. We will continue to closely monitor our spending and implement cost-saving measures as necessary, as we did to close the gap in 2022. However, with the increasing needs and expected mounting losses in rent revenue, the anticipated annual deficit climbs to about $56 million in 2027. 2/3 of NYCHA's operating revenue comes from federal sources. This year, we expect to receive about $1.2 billion in federal operating subsidy. However, as noted, the other third of our operating revenue comes from rent, and we expect to collect about $850 million in rent this year, about $150 million less than we should be collecting. In our 2023 budget, we assumed a proration factor of 89% for the operating subsidy, $150 million less than what NYCHA is eligible for. We also expect to receive $234 million in city operating funds. We expect to receive about $1.46 billion for Section 8 vouchers and the associated administrative fees this year. NYCHA is receiving the previous year's expenses plus a Section 8 administrative fee that is estimated to be prorated by 88%. Along with program reserves, NYCHA will be appropriately funded to issue more Section 8 vouchers for low-income New Yorkers. Our projected expenses for 2023 include about $1.46 billion in Section 8 payments to landlords, $1.52 billion in salaries and fringe benefits, $463 million in contracts, $604 million in utility payments, and $367 million for expenses such as leases, supplies, vehicles, and equipment. A significant portion of our expenses are beyond our control and rising, such as utilities and employee benefits. The majority of our buildings are more than a half-century old, and the historic lack of investment is driving up the cost to simply maintain them. Due to the insufficient rental revenue and the escalating costs related to the HUD agreement, NYCHA has relied heavily on operating reserves to improve services for residents and meet the demands of the agreement. As part of our efforts to close this year's budget gap, we will withdraw $65 million from our operating reserves, leaving less than 1 month of reserves. To put this in context, HUD recommends 3 to 4 months of operating reserves for public housing authorities of our size. To help close this year's deficit, we will also use $17 million in restricted PACT proceeds. And we will again shift 35% of our federal capital grant for our basic operations, the maximum amount we can shift under the HUD rules. Chief Financial Officer Anika Lescott-Martinez will now provide a few more details about NYCHA's 2023 budget and financial outlook.
Thank you, Lisa. I believe you all have the slides in front of you. We're currently on slide 2. So as Lisa mentioned,
Oh, I think you need to. Anika, can you speak into the mic?
sorry, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Can I acknowledge? Before you continue, I just want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Barron online and Councilmember De La Rosa. Thank you.
Great,
Please
thank-
continue.
Thank you, Councilmember. So tenant rent arrears total $466 million over 73,000 households as of December 31st, 2022, which is up from $125 million in 2019. So if you're looking at the slides, each of the red bars represents the millions cumulatively that NYCHA is owed. Next slide. And the dotted line shows our tenant cumulative rate of rent collection. So you'll notice that the rate is going down from 88% at its high in 2019 down to 64% where we are at the end of 2022. That means that we're only collecting 64% of all the rent we charge over a 12-month period, and HUD expects PHAs like us to collect 100% of the rent. So our operating subsidy and HUD support does not increase to cover the difference. To date, as Lisa mentioned, NYCHA submitted $121 million worth of emergency rental assistance program applications for over 31,000 households. But keep in mind that those households owe $240 million and counting. Next slide. Given our precarious financial position due to large tenant rent arrears, increasing utility costs, and increasing HUD SDNY agreement expenses, we had to take the following proactive measures in the 2023 budget to shore up our financial position. First, we prioritized stable funding for property management contracts, staffing, and increases for the pillar areas where appropriate. Second, we removed all non-essential contract spending in the central office departments through a zero-based budgeting exercise, which allowed us to reallocate $119 million to other critical areas. Third, we eliminated 145 vacant budgeted positions in the central office, with the exclusion of our pillar areas, compliance departments, properties, and leased housing. We recognize that further reductions may be required. And lastly, we are submitting an operating subsidy appeal to HUD to fund the mandated HUD agreement environmental expenses. Next slide. I won't spend too much time here because Lisa went through this in the testimony, but this essentially shows our 2023 sources and uses, which were just discussed. The main idea here is that we're anticipating a $35 million year-end deficit in 2023, and we will closely monitor the deficit and provide a mid-year update to the NYCHA board with regard to our progress. Slide 5. Great. So in the absence of sufficient rental revenue and our escalating costs related to the HUD agreement, NYCHA has relied heavily on our operating reserves to improve services for our residents and meet the compliance demands of the HUD SDNY agreement. So what you're looking at down below is the reserves available for use in blue and the withdrawal that we had to make from that reserve in pink. The dashed line shows a month of reserves, which estimates about $254 million. So if you notice, in the 2022 budget, we withdrew about $100 million from our reserves, and in 2023, we're anticipating a $65 million draw. That unfortunately puts us at less than 1 month of reserves, actually around 25 days. And HUD recommends that a PHA of our size has 3 to 4 months of reserves on hand at any given time. Lastly, and so what does this mean for NYCHA? Next slide. So in terms of financial risks, we really wanted to make sure that we were being transparent about without additional funding or improvement in tenant rent payments, NYCHA will be forced to significantly cut our expenses and curtail property repairs beginning in 2024. And this could potentially impact repairs required for HUD SDNY agreement compliance. So we've outlined 5 of the key financial risks down below. First, $121 million in emergency rental assistance funding is unlikely, while the households with pending ERAP applications amass $240 million in arrears. That's about half of the arrears balance in total. Second, we have been heavily relying on our one-time unrestricted developer fees to cover what we know to be ongoing increased operating expenses from the HUD SDNY agreement, and that's not sustainable in the long term. Third, our repeated reserve draws are reducing our cash position, and it makes it difficult to respond to unanticipated issues, pre-fund our state, federal, and city capital projects, and mitigate any unexpected delays or reductions in grant funding, like a federal shutdown. Fourth, our overtime costs are continuing to grow year over year as we deal with the increasing rate of decay at NYCHA properties. And lastly, our utility costs have increased 20% due to price and consumption increases. I'll pass it back to Lisa.
Thank you, Anika. In terms of NYCHA's capital investment in our properties, about $2.45 billion is available for this purpose in 2023, including approximately $390 million in expected federal capital funding, $741 million in city capital funding available in the 2023 city fiscal year, and other federal, state, and city funds allocated from prior year's awards. We are grateful for the city's support, which is vital to our efforts. We are also grateful for the state's commitment of $350 million in 2022, which we plan to use to upgrade heating systems and repair facades across the city after finalizing a funding agreement. While the capital funding we receive is only a fraction of the more than $40 billion needed to provide residents with the quality of life they deserve, we are making a difference with the money we do receive. More than 700 capital projects are underway across the city. Over 250 of these projects are in the construction phase. In 2023, we anticipate committing an additional $950 million to upgrade heating systems, roofs, elevators, and waste management systems, repair building facades, and abate lead-based paint and asbestos in apartments, among other important capital improvements. Expenditure in 2023 is expected to be $935 million or $78 million each month. NYCHA consistently meets and exceeds HUD's deadlines for obligating and expending federal capital funds. For the past several years, we've exceeded those deadlines by an average of 7 months and 16 months, respectively. We have also increased our rate of committing city capital funds over previous years to 21.2% as of the end of February, and we expect to further increase this rate by the end of the city's fiscal year. As of the end of 2022, we have completed $2.83 billion of Sandy recovery work, providing thousands of residents with new roofs, flood-proofed electrical equipment, boilers, backup power generators, flood protection, as well as exterior lights, CCTV cameras, and security systems. For the 2022 hurricane season, 100 apartment buildings had flood protection, and almost 10,000 households had full backup power generators installed. By the end of 2023, those numbers will almost double. Towards meeting our HUD agreement targets, we have replaced 86 boilers and 8 elevators as of today through capital investments. In 2023, construction work will be underway at scores of developments to replace an additional 50 boilers and 160 elevators. There are now 317 brand new roofs at NYCHA developments, thanks to our roof replacement program, and an additional 383 roof replacements are in progress. Additionally, we have completed or significantly advanced a range of smaller projects funded through mayoral, discretionary city council, or borough president allocations. After the 2022 preliminary budget hearing, we began working to further accelerate projects with city funding allocated in 2020 or earlier. Of the 72 projects we prioritized through this effort, 20 are now substantially complete, 32 are in construction, and 20 are in procurement or completing design work to move to construction during 2023. Even with the significant progress in our capital portfolio over the last year and the large number of projects completing or in construction this year, this area of NYCHA's work will be impacted by our operating budget shortfall and resulting staffing constraints. We are mitigating these impacts to the extent possible, but have identified approximately 70 projects that we must pause in the next few months as a result of our operating budget constraints, which are due to growing rent arrears, insufficient operating funding, rising expenses, and staffing and resourcing limitations. These 70 projects account for only 1% of the unexpended budget across all of our active capital projects, and they do not involve work directly related to the HUD agreement, other health, safety, and security issues, or other major programs. However, approximately 50 projects with city discretionary funding, mainly related to community center and playground renovations and ground improvements, are included in this group of paused projects. As we continue to invest in our buildings and campuses with the funds at our disposal, we are also investing in our organization, making fundamental changes that will enable us to better serve residents. This work is underway across various areas of NYCHA as guided by our transformation plan. Developed and implemented through ongoing feedback from residents and staff, the transformation plan envisions operational and organizational changes that will improve customer service and responsiveness to conditions at our developments, ensure that large projects are completed in a timely manner, and promote accountability through property management performance metrics. The transformation plan's neighborhood model created smaller property management portfolios that are easier to manage while bringing more decision-making and resources to developments. We also reoriented our centralized functions, such as heat and pest management, to the neighborhood model to provide increased oversight and stronger coordination with property management. The Transformation Plan's Work Order Reform Initiative is bringing improved communication and enhanced services to residents across the city. Revised caretaker schedules provide for the unique janitorial needs of each development, providing greater accountability to ensure our properties are clean and well-maintained. The implementation of a supplier risk management and vendor screening tool is helping to ensure that we are selecting the best vendors possible to carry out the critical work we are doing for residents. We are striving to provide residents with safe and healthy homes in very tangible ways. For instance, we performed lead abatement at more than 1,500 apartments in accordance with the city's new and stricter standard for detecting the presence of lead. We discussed at last month's hearing the advances we have made in our ventilation improvement program, including how we completed the installation of thousands of new roof fans at developments in all 5 boroughs. We are also working to help address the housing instability crisis in our city by issuing more than 5,700 emergency housing vouchers to New Yorkers last year. EHVs are tenant-based vouchers targeting those families experiencing at risk of homelessness or housing instability, referred directly by the city's continuum of care providers. Our comprehensive modernization program will complete more holistic capital improvements at selected developments instead of simply repairing individual building components. Launched at 4 developments so far, the program is supported by $650 million in our City Capital Action Plan and $200 million from the Gowanus Neighborhood Rezoning. The PACT initiative is revitalizing the homes of thousands of NYCHA residents. In 2022, PACT drove $2 billion in large-scale improvements, providing residents with more than 8,500 apartments across 17 developments with comprehensive apartment renovations, building systems, and infrastructure upgrades, and improved grounds and common areas. Currently, 137 developments comprising over 36,000 apartments are either in the engagement or pre-development process, under construction, or have received comprehensive repairs through PACT. Our goal is to bring dramatically improved quality of life to about 62,000 NYCHA families in total through PACT. We are proud that our collaboration with our partners in state government helped pass the New York City Public Housing Preservation Trust last year. The trust will transform the homes of 25,000 NYCHA families through an innovative 100% public model to bring much-needed new funding to these developments. As part of an extensive engagement process, residents at select sites will begin voting this year on whether or not to implement the trust at their developments. While the challenges are numerous and true change takes time, we know that with the dedication of NYCHA staff and the partnership of residents and other stakeholders, including members of the council, we will prevail. Long entrenched issues, those stemming from half a century of federal government disinvestment from public housing across the nation, can only be solved through innovative approaches and bold new ways of thinking. We must come together as a community to seize this once-in-a-generation opportunity to pivot to a better and stronger tomorrow. Thank you for your support as we strive to improve the quality of life for today's families and the generations to come. We are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Brewer to ask.
Oh, nice of you. All right. Thank you very much. I'll be quick. Thank you very much. Just like everyone else, I've heard from the state officials about the fact that people aren't paying rent and it's a problem. So my question is, it sounds like you're never going to get state money. I don't know. We'll try for it. But how can we help with our developments to work on one-shots or whatever is appropriate? Because it does seem to me that that's a really huge problem. So how, I know you listed some, one-shots aren't that easy to get, but how can we help on that front? Does the state have any possibility of doing it, or should we be working locally, and both?
Thank you so much for that question. And we would hope that the state will be able to find money to serve our subsidized residents, not only residents of NYCHA, but residents across the state who live in public subsidized housing. New York State was the only state to deprioritize subsidized housing. And as Anika mentioned, more than half of our rent arrears comes from people who applied for ERAP and have been waiting.
Because you're at the bottom of the list, is my understanding.
We are at the bottom of the list.
Okay. Second question, I have Wise Towers, with all due respect to the person who was doing the developer, who was doing the PACT RAD. It's not great. It's because I think there wasn't the kind of input that was appropriate with Elliott and Fulton. That was perfect, and they're on their own, doing really well. So how much money, I know you mentioned some number, is going into the PACT program, and how do you get your money out? How does that work? Because it seems to me with all the money that they will in fact end up making, at least the risers could work, and we don't have to have floods. And I'm calling about the elevator, and you know, tenants even say, I want to go back to NYCHA. That's how bad it is. So how much money is involved with how does the money work and how much is involved with PACT? And, I know you mentioned a big number. I don't know if that's actually happening.
Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. So overall, the PACT program, if we split it into kind of two groups, those sites that have already converted through PACT and those sites that are in planning or engagement, and we expect to convert in the next couple of years. For the sites that have already converted, which is just under 16,000 units, the capital repairs are estimated at about $3.4 billion. Okay. So those are financing that will be raised by the PACT development partners to do renovations up to the full scope that we require. So if there are concerns that you or constituents have on a specific project around...
He knows them all, don't worry.
Yes, we're in close communication with Brian and his team. We're very happy to look into those and talk with you all
I can handle
offline.
them. I just want to know, so 3.4, and then to be, you want to try to do 64,000 units or 62,000?
That's right. In addition to the 3.4, currently we have about 20,000 additional units where we're in the planning or engagement stage with residents. And for that set of units, our estimated capital need is about $3.6 billion,
Okay.
right? So together, between those two groups, which is about 36,000 units, we anticipate, meeting the equivalent of about $7 billion of capital needs addressed through the PACT program. And obviously, for the remaining, 26,000 up to that 62,000, we would expect a similar per unit average, but those sites have not been obviously selected as of today, so we don't have specific numbers on the capital need.
Okay, and then what are the reporting requirements that the converters go through? Is it a constant, is it monthly, is it quarterly? How does that work?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. I think this is a very critical aspect. So we have a dedicated function whose role it is to only oversee PACT developers once a property converts.
Okay.
So they're in pretty constant communication, both right after the conversion during the construction period, as well as after that. So in terms of specific reporting we get, in addition to regular contact we have with these developers, we require a monthly report.
Okay.
Where they report across a range of indicators around physical conditions, tenancy proceedings, et cetera.
All right, I won't keep you anymore. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You can see what the challenges are.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember De La Rosa?
Thank you so much, Chair. I do have a question about ERAP and rent arrears. So in the case where a tenant is not able to come up with the funds to pay for rent arrears and there's no options, what does that process look like right now?
Well, right now, applications for subsidized housing residents have not been determined. So right now, a tenant who has filed for ERAP is currently protected and cannot be evicted from NYCHA. Again, we are hopeful that the state will find funding in order to or make funding available for our tenants. Otherwise, they would have to find other sources of ways to help them. So one-shot deals, payment plans. But if you think about it, an average family at NYCHA makes $24,000, a little more than $24,000 a year. Mm-hmm. The average rental arrears for those families is over $6,000. So it's incomprehensible. Yeah. And incredibly frustrating both for us and for our residents. So every opportunity we will have, we will take to try to make sure that they get back on track.
Yeah, and the for example, one-shot deal is not foolproof because you can only take it once a year, I think it is, and also you have to be able to show an ongoing ability to pay your rent going forward, and there's challenges in that, right? If you're someone who doesn't make, like you said, enough money to actually pay what you owe and plus the ongoing rent.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. But as I said in my testimony, we have interim recertifications. If somebody has a reduction in their income, they should immediately come into the management office. They should ask for a rent reduction. Your rent can be reduced to zero if you are not showing any type of income. But we really would ask that for the people who do have an income, that they pay their rent, because the rent is such an integral part of our budget.
Thank you. And I just have one other question about the capital funds. Obviously, I'm disappointed to hear that some of our projects we've been waiting for, in Dykeman houses and Marble Hill houses in our districts, are delayed. But I want to know what is going to be the communication for communities to understand where the delays come from, and what possible timeline there is. And in addition to that, I also want to ask, so if there's going to be capital requests for the coming years, should we not fund those projects because there's a delay? Like, what is the plan for addressing ongoing delays? Because we don't want to continue to put money in if it's not going to move the needle forward, right? And I know, like, I was in Albany for 5 years. I know that this is an uphill battle, and that we have not invested in NYCHA in the way that we should be investing in NYCHA, right? And that's at the crux of this system that is completely broken at this point. But I want to know, what is the plan going forward for capital needs? Because when I go to my NYCHA centers, they're asking us for renovations, and we want to be able to use the little bit of capital funding that we have, especially and during this budget process, to advocate for things. But is there a point of doing that if there isn't going to be projects that are going to come to fruition for our communities?
Great, thank you, Council Member. Just to answer your first question, this, and to reiterate, right, 99% of our budgeted projects will move forward as per the current schedules. It's on that unfortunate 1% where we're going to have to make this difficult decision to pause them. Those projects, could already be in design, they could be in procurement, so typically we're already engaging with residents and stakeholders. And so they won't, completely go on pause, let's say today. It'll be over the next few months where there's a natural point to stop the work. We'll engage with stakeholders, explain why we're stopping the work, where we're stopping, and how we'll be able to pick that work up again once we're able to resolve our operating budget constraints.
I will say though that for that 1%, right? Like, I'm looking at this list, there's like 4 projects in every council district that are delayed. In my own district, there's 3 projects that are delayed. So although it's, maybe 1% of all the projects that are in the hopper, it's a large portfolio of projects that are paused.
That's right, Councilmember De La Rosa, and we would like to move those projects forward as quickly as possible as soon as our budgetary issues are resolved, and that kind of is the answer to your second question, which is that as soon as we're able to fully resource the project load that we have, we would pick up these 50 projects, and any further allocations we get for small discretionary projects, we will try to be creative and see how we can combine those new funding allocations with existing projects and move them forward. Otherwise, we're going to be able to staff and resource them after we can resolve, the existing portfolio that we have, right? Naturally, just given we'd want to move these forward first before we take on new projects. What I would say is, as any agency, we do also have funding gaps for a number of projects, and so if there's an opportunity to redirect allocations to some of those limited funding projects, that may be another opportunity for council members to contribute to the districts and the specific properties.
Councilmember Ressler.
Thank you so much, Chair Aviles. I really appreciate your leadership, and thank you to the NYCHA team for joining us today. I'd like to just start on the topic of Chair Aviles' last hearing, of the Public Housing Committee's last hearing, around the increase that we're experiencing in the timeline to prepare vacant apartments. And, we've seen this extraordinary increase. I'm actually looking at different numbers. Some of the numbers that I'm looking at say it's increased from, the timeline to reoccupancy has increased from 182 to 399 days over the last year. Something else I'm reading is saying it wasn't quite that bad, but close to it. Under any circumstances, it's been an extreme increase. And yet, NYCHA's proposed reducing the vacant readiness program by 31 million, or NYCHA and the mayor have cut the vacant apartment readiness program by 31 million over the last 4 years. Could you just clarify for us how it's conscionable to cut this program when we're seeing such an extraordinary increase in the length of time that apartments are vacant?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Ressler, for that question. And once again, I'm Eva Trimble, Chief Operating Officer for NYCHA. So I want to be clear that it wasn't NYCHA who cut the funding, but we worked closely with OMB to realign the forecast in the 5-year plan to match our actual spending. The Vacant Readiness Program has been very successful for us in giving us the funding to do primarily the lead and asbestos testing work that's needed for our turnover process, and that's a really large range of funding. So apartments can go anywhere from $28,000 to $63,000, depending on whether they're positive for both lead or asbestos or neither. And so we worked with OMB to budget the program at the maximum amount, but we don't always need all that funding. So we've, year by year. So we've worked with OMB to match the funding to our production volume. And so we have never had a shortfall in funding to do to do the work that we need to do.
What doesn't jive for me is that OMB is slashing the funding by $31 million over 4 years, while the timelines to prepare vacant apartments are going through the roof. That's when we should be investing more resources so that we can more speedily fill vacant apartments, because we all know the homelessness crisis that we're facing in New York City. And that just takes me to my next point, which is, so I just want to say, it doesn't make sense to me that this is a question of what NYCHA can afford to spend, what NYCHA can manage to execute. You all were doing it at a much more aggressive pace just a year ago, and under this mayor, as funding for the program gets slashed, the timelines to prepare vacant apartments have gone way down. And so, and I kind of on the next point I was hoping to raise, we're seeing a decline in placements of homeless families into NYCHA housing. And I know that's been offset a bit by additional placements in Section 8, but I just wanted to look for clarity. Is there a goal or a metric that NYCHA is keeping to right now in terms of the percent of vacant apartments that are going to families exiting homeless services and other high-need populations?
Sure. So I'll start by also adding that the time delay that we're seeing is, as we discussed in the last hearing, is due to both the environmental work and the level of general repair work that's needed in the apartments at turnover. We really strive to make sure that every apartment is lead-free and asbestos safe, but there is also cabinet work, plastering work, painting work that needs to get done. And we are looking at ways to expand our capacity to do all of that work to increase the volume. But that being said, on your DHS question,
you can't do it if you've lost $31 million for the next 4 years. My point is that OMB is cutting us off at the knees and preventing us from actually being able to do the work that's necessary to fill these vacant apartments and get them inhabitable. That's why I'm angry. It's not that I don't think you can do the work or that you can upgrade the apartments so that they can be inhabited. I understand that there are additional requirements around lead testing and otherwise that you need to do, and I welcome it. I'm annoyed that you don't have the staff to be able to do it and that you're being cut, and you have no ability to actually execute what is needed, and when you don't have the staff. And I just think this is a cut that makes no sense.
And regarding the homeless placements, we are turning over less units this year. So typically since 2014, approximately, we've always allocated about 25% of our vacant units for families experiencing homelessness and coming out of the city shelter system. So that 25% has stayed fairly constant. We are turning over less units per year at the moment, so they are less, available for families experiencing homelessness.
My understanding was as a percentage that it had dropped as well, but appreciate if you're saying that those numbers have stayed constant. I would like to see those numbers on set-asides for homeless families increase, as it's critically important. But we also need to, of course, increase the speed at which we're turning over apartments. Would it be okay if I ask one more question?
Yeah, and I'd like to know, do we have the numbers of how many set-asides for this past fiscal year and the prior one?
Sure. In 2022, we did just over 600 rentals for DHS clients.
And do you have that for 21 on how it compares year over year?
Yes, for 21 it was one.
That's just public housing.
Just public housing, just to be clear, not through the Section 8 program.
Right.
And in 2021 it was just over 1,000.
it's a significant decline, and it's a significant decline at a time when we have less apartments that are being renovated and so that they can be inhabitable for families. The last thing I just wanted to ask is, we've experienced this dramatic decline, as the chair mentioned, in rental payment rate. I believe we're down to 65%, up from 88% pre-pandemic, if I have the numbers right. And I'm just trying to understand, if ERAP funding doesn't come through or the state does not provide subsidy, what's the plan, and how are we doing, what kind of engagement are we doing with each tenant to provide a kind of one-on-one household plan for how they can catch up on rent and get back into in good standing, for the long-term health of the housing authority and for the stability of the tenants?
Sure, I can start on that last part and then hand it off. So for any resident who's experiencing rental arrears, our property management staff reach out to the residents. They do door knocks, they do phone calls, they invite the residents to come into the management office and speak about what's going on. As Lisa mentioned, we would do interim recertifications to readjust rent if they're having rent hardships. However, what we're seeing with this significant amount of rent arrears is that it becomes a burden. Once residents are so far in debt, it's very hard for them to start, choosing to pay rent again.
Right.
And so we are really hoping that if we can get some relief at the state level to clear those accounts, to give residents a fresh start, they will start paying rent again. I think, the level of rent we were receiving before, the residents would start paying again if we could clear those arrears out.
I appreciate that. Happy to support the advocacy for it. If there are ways in which I can be helpful in the 7 developments in our district, we could set up financial counseling workshops, be happy to go door to door, connect people to HRA and one-shot deals in any ways we can. We want to help make sure that every tenant in our developments is in good standing and are supported to access all of the resources that they should be able to benefit from to catch up. I can only imagine how overwhelming it is when you're thousands upon thousands of dollars behind in rent, and it feels kind of hopeless to contribute the amount that you can. And if we can try to do our best to work together to bring resources to bear, we would love to do so.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your answers. I appreciate it. Sorry, I did not sleep well last night.
Thank you, Councilmember. Great. So can you talk to us about what elements in the budget support the mayor's housing blueprint, and where should we expect to see more activity in future plans?
I think the key part of the mayor's housing blueprint that you see in the budget is the dedication to the transformation plan. As we mentioned earlier, the focus on improving our repair process, our focus on funding skilled trades, and really this focus on ensuring that the property management operations were held more harmless from the cuts than central office was. And that's the key of the housing blueprint, was focused on achieving our transformation plan goals.
So would you say the current budget proposal exempts those operating or those repair lines from cuts?
It does. We did not cut any lines from the properties, from our leased housing program, our pillar areas of the HUD agreement, and any of our compliance departments.
And what is NYCHA doing in order to fill those desperate needs for skills tradespersons?
Currently, we have 696 positions in the pipeline that are not filled. 237 of those are in the central office, 307 are in properties in the boroughs, and 152 are central operations. Most of those are civil service titles, so we've been working with DCAS to have hiring fairs, trying to get pools of applicants so that we can do direct hiring, even if the hiring manager is not available. So our HR department has been working very closely with DCAS.
And have you noted specific goals over a time period? Obviously, that is a huge number, and I know the city is having significant challenges in hiring across the board. Are there specific time-bound goals that you are trying to reach in order to fill these positions?
I mean, our goal is to hire all of our vacant, but we don't have intermittent or individual goals. Like, our goal is to fill all of the current positions that we have.
Sure, I appreciate that. But if you don't have reachable, accessible goals for staff, you know, shooting for the sky is a nice effort, but you're always going to come up short. So, like, in the next 6 months, do you have a plan around specifically what you would do, how you would change your outreach to meet those goals?
Well, honestly, if you think about the fact that we have an 8% vacancy rate, and out of the 937 budgeted positions, only 696 have to be filled. We actually think that that's a pretty achievable goal.
My understanding is you have within the operations area a 17.5 vacancy rate in those areas of skilled trades, that the 6% is overall.
So the 8% is NYCHA-wide. And let's just go through. We have, in the 2023 adopted headcount is 12,212 full-time positions. 10,020 of those are at the properties in operation. 2,192 are in the central office. Out of the 10,020, we have 307 vacancies at the properties and in the boroughs, and 152 in central operations. Correct? No? Do you want to?
Yeah, I just want to clarify for the record. Out of the vacancies, we have 394 in the properties and borough offices, 257 in operations, and 286 in the central office departments, for a total of 937. So only slightly different.
Okay.
But yes, Lisa was correct. The vacancy rate across NYCHA is around 8%, and as mentioned, we are of course focusing on the properties and the borough offices, and especially all of our operations vacancies.
So what are the challenges to expedited hiring that you've encountered?
I think fundamentally the most challenging are the civil service rules, the 1 in 3 in hiring, and we have, again, focused on working with DCAS. We have the hiring pools, which gives us a bit more flexibility.
And what role does OMB play in approving NYCHA's hires, if any?
OMB does not approve NYCHA's hires.
All right, let's go back to the rental arrears situation. We've heard a lot that there's been advocacy at the state level, and Councilmember Brewer noted, what was the plan if the state doesn't come through with that funding? Can you talk to us about what is the plan C or D if that does not materialize?
I have to say, the plan, there has to be funding from the state for ERAP. There has to be a way to protect affordable housing and our NYCHA residents. As we said, when you think about the amount of arrears for people who applied for ERAP, it's nearly double. So the people who applied for ERAP, it was $240 million, or it's $240 million in total arrears for the people who applied for ERAP, the $120 million that we filed for. If funding does not come through, then what we are going to have to do is systematically make sure that our tenants apply for one-shot deals, get funding from outside sources, enter into payment plans. But again, to our point earlier, if you are a family making $24,000 a year and you have over $6,000 in rental arrears, a one-shot deal is not is not going to help you. It's not going to make you feel good about paying your rent again. We serve the most vulnerable populations in New York, and they deserve to be treated exactly the same way their neighbors who live across the street who are not in subsidized housing.
So you're definitely preaching to the choir here. I appreciate the optimism that there has to be a way, but under the guise that we're sitting in our most precious resource that is $40 billion in arrears, and I don't have a whole lot of confidence. If the state fails, will NYCHA present the $330 million asked to OMB as a new need?
Just 1 second. If you could just please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do. Good afternoon. Brian Honan, Senior Vice President of Intergovernmental Affairs at NYCHA. So over the last few months, we've put together, I think, a really strong coalition of upstate and downstate housing authorities, advocates, residents, and legislators to really make this rent arrears issue something to be taken serious in Albany. We feel very confident in our ability to make our case, and I think we have made our case. However, if that does not come to fruition, we will come right back to the council, I'm telling you, on April 2nd to present a Plan B. I do not want to give that today because I think that will be letting, other folks off the hook.
Absolutely
and
not.
I want to make sure that we keep our focus over the next few weeks on Albany, and we will share a Plan B as soon as possible.
Thank you for that, Brian. The question is not to let the state off the hook at all by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I think that is a floor of a request for NYCHA from what the state should be investing in, because these are New York State residents. So in fact, my expectation is much higher, both operationally and in terms of capital funding for NYCHA. So that is not at all to be misconstrued. Nevertheless, I am deeply concerned, as we all are, and this is not to set up the authority to fail. It is, the death by 1,000 cuts. Everyone's on the hook here, including New York City.
I totally understand that, council member, and I think, this panel here and others behind me, we spend 7 days a week thinking about this issue. We do have, Plan B, C, and D. But I just don't want to give away I don't want to give away the end of the story yet.
So we talked about the accumulation of the rental arrears and the opportunity for residents to do interim recertification. Can you talk to us about what the engagement is in terms of why residents are falling behind? How have those payment plans worked out, and how is that actually looking on the ground?
So we reach out to residents, as I said, who are facing arrears. We do a lot of referrals through our Family Partnerships Department to financial counseling and other resources that, whatever the family needs in order to help stabilize their situation and hopefully cut off the arrears and have them return to payments. We do offer payment plans. I don't have the number of information right now today on how many payment plans we have, but we are reaching out to residents and offering all of these services to try to get them back on a stabilized fit.
Could you provide to the council a reporting on how many families you've reached out to and how many are actively in payment plans?
Sure, we will follow up with that information.
Thank you. In terms of evictions, obviously, in this context, we are deeply concerned about evictions. how is the legal department working through evictions process? And what is the numbers to date?
So during the pandemic, we took a look at our eviction process. At the time, I was NYCHA's general counsel. And what we did was we discontinued over 30,000 pending non-payment actions in housing court. And what we decided to do was focus on residents who had the largest amount of arrears for the longest amount of time. And that's what we continue to do, although there have been people who had pre-pandemic arrears who filed for ERAP protection. So those cases are not moving forward. I can tell you that since the eviction moratorium lifted, I believe that we have evicted 5 or 6 families. So our in
fiscal
total.
22?
No, I think in 2 years, right? Because the eviction moratorium ended last January, so it ended about a year and a half. So our goal is to keep people housed, and we take that commitment very seriously. So again, we are laser focused on people with the highest amount of arrears for the longest amount of time.
So how many people, I mean, we have, was it 30,000 are on the ERAP list alone? How many are in?
We have about 70,000 families who have some form of rental arrears.
And none of those 70,000 are in eviction proceedings?
No, so we have 70,000 total. We have 31,000 who applied for ERAP protection. And again, we're being strategic. So we have certainly not 70,000. We have, I don't have the exact number, but I can get to you how many cases we have pending. But it is a minuscule amount considering the number of cases that we had pending prior to the pandemic.
Okay, but you'll get back.
Oh, here, actually, I can tell you right now.
Okay.
Since the eviction moratorium ended, we served about 1,000 rent demands and filed 500 cases. The 6 evictions were over the past year.
So the 500 cases are eviction cases?
Correct, yes.
And only 5 materialized of those 500?
6.
6. And do we know how many, is it remain 500 cases or still, or is that number changed?
Well, so it's fluid, right? I mean,
do you know how many now you have on the rolls? How many eviction cases are pending?
So,
or how many cases? I think I'm using the wrong legal terminology.
Okay. So I think you should just assume that, and we can also follow up with you if it's easier, because the language is very, very important when we're talking about these type of cases. So why don't we just get you the breakdown after the hearing?
Okay. Okay, in terms of the vacant unit readiness program, clearly the mayor should have exempted NYCHA from this PEG, given the housing crisis in our city and the fact that we have so many incredible vacant units. In fact, we have more vacant units than the Innovation Queens rezoning proposal that is expected to be built several years away. The numbers are mind-blowing. I think we have still yet to receive a breakdown of why those units are vacant. We hear, as you've mentioned, environmental and general repair does not tell us specifically where they are in the queue and why they are in the queue and why there are so many. So we're still waiting for those responses from NYCHA for the record. Can you tell us a little bit about how, let me see, How is NYCHA planning to improve the turnaround time with this cut in place?
Right now, we're evaluating our resources for the program, including our split between the use of vendors and the use of our own staff, in order to find ways to improve the turnaround process and increase our production of turnover units. And I do want to just add that NYCHA, still maintains an extremely low vacancy rate of just over 3%. So even with the units that we're looking at right now, it's still a very low vacancy rate for our entire portfolio.
Sure, but you have the largest amount of vacant units ever. How do you explain that?
Again, part of that is due to the environmental work that we're performing on all of our apartments. In the past years, we would turn over apartments and not do all of that due diligence that we're doing right now. So we'd much rather have the vacant units and ensure that every person that's moving in or transferring within NYCHA is having a lead-free and asbestos-safe apartment.
So would you say 90% is because of environmental reasons?
No, it's definitely
50%?
It's a mix. I don't know.
That's my point. My point is NYCHA has not provided any clear data around the breakout of the various reasons and their time frames. All we're seeing, the data we're seeing that comes from your data, is increasing number of units vacant throughout the city with no pattern, and a larger and longer times to get these units back online, and a cutting of a program to get these units back online. None of it makes sense.
We just received the formal follow-ups from that hearing with the specific questions that you wanted us to respond to, and we are working on those responses now, so that we will absolutely be providing the breakdown of all the vacant units and their categorization.
I'm gonna check with my. We'll take a break and turn to my colleague, Councilmember Pierina Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Chair Aviles, and thank you, NYCHA, for answering all of our questions today. I know that some of my colleagues have asked questions around this, but I'm really struck at, we're having a conversation that we've had time and again, right? The underfunding, and it's just seems to be different versions of the same discussion. But looking at the operational deficit that NYCHA has today, I'm just trying to understand how the agency is going to just be able to continue to carry out these core functions, right? And I'm looking, at this list of projects that are going to be stalled, two of which are in my district, shared with Carmen de la Rosa, Councilmember de la Rosa, and Marble Hill. And that's really it. What are we seeing? Are we seeing layoffs at NYCHA? Are we just seeing hiring slow down? How is this manifesting, the 845 vacancies?
Great, so that's a great question. Thank you so much, Council Member. So we are not pursuing any active layoffs at NYCHA. The positions that were cut were vacant budgeted positions. So presumably they have been open, and while it's not ideal, we have been managing without that staff. Thank you. And then zooming in on the fact that of these 845 vacancies, 500 are in operations, I'm having trouble squaring that with you're saying that there is an emphasis on the pillar areas, right, from the agreements with HUD and SDNY. How are we having 500 operational vacancies and still able to meet our criteria on mold and elevators and the other pillars of the agreement? Sure, I can start, and I'm happy to pass it over to Eva. So as mentioned, those are the vacant positions, but those have funding, and so we do fully intend to staff up, as Lisa mentioned. That is our goal. We have been working with DCAS very closely. We do have civil service requirements that we have to meet, and we continue also to do outreach to our residents to make sure that those positions are hired for. But I'll pass it to Eva in terms of our progress on the pillar areas.
So those vacancies, and as Lisa mentioned, we're actively trying to fill those vacancies, really only represent a 5% vacancy for all of operations. So operations is a total of just over 10,000 employees, And while it's critical that we remain as fully staffed as possible, there is always a natural attrition rate that we're working to refill. So this is just a 5%, and we're actively hiring, and so we're continuing to operate without significant impact from those vacancies.
Great. Thank you. That is helpful to understand. And then the other 445 vacancies, could you share more on where those are, what kind of roles, what kind of positions, and are you also looking to hire those? Are those budgeted?
Sure, so I'm happy to speak to that. And I also just want to clarify the numbers. I think there are different numbers floating around. So our vacancies are 937, as we mentioned, that's 8%. 394 at the properties and borough offices, 257 are in operations. So all told, that's what sits under the chief operating officer in Eva's team. 286 of those are in the central office departments. So things like legal, finance, admin, and the like.
And are those funded, or are you
All of
looking
those
to-
positions are funded.
So you're looking to hire for those as well?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, NYCHA.
Thank you. Thank you, council member. So going back to the vacant unit readiness, how does property management at the developments coordinate with the vacant unit readiness contractors? We hear that there are coordination challenges between the two.
Thank you, council member. The programs, coordinate together. There's always going to be some communication problems, but in general, property management initiates the process of a turnover by, when a resident moves out, they collect the keys and then they mark the unit that it's ready for turnover. And that the first step is that it goes through the lead and asbestos process. And once the lead and asbestos process is complete, if the apartment is designated as one of the apartments going through the vacant readiness program, then it gets turned over to the vendor program, and the vendors do the work. Not all of our units that are getting turned over are getting turned over through vacant readiness program or city funding. There are other units that we just turn over through the property management process. The skilled trades come in and do all the necessary repairs. So there is some coordination between whether this unit is going through the vendor program or whether it's going through our property management, just skilled trades work. And we are in constant conversations to improve that coordination, as I mentioned before.
And what distinguishes where the unit goes, whether it goes to the unit readiness or to the property management?
We've identified 2,283 units as the goal for the vacant readiness program. So we've selected units. I will get back to you on how those units were selected, but we've identified 2,283 as the goal for the vacant readiness program through June 2023. We have not yet set targets for the out years. And so we're, if that apartment has been designated for the program, it goes through the vendor work. If it's not, it just proceeds through our property management and skilled trades work.
And how close are you to achieving that goal?
So far, of the 2,283, we have leased up 1,246. In addition, we have 898 units remaining to repair, of which 235 have already completed their environmental work.
So the 898, what does that mean again? What was the designation for?
Those are the units remaining to repair.
What does that mean?
They're still going through the repair process.
And that could be, can you explain to us a little bit about what the range of repairs that could include?
Sure. So out of the 898, 235 have already completed lead and asbestos work. So 636 units are going through the other work. So usually an apartment needs painting or plastering, sometimes carpentry to install new cabinets that may have been damaged, other type of fixtures. So the general repair work that is needed because of the wear and tear on the apartments.
Would you say that the plan to cut the vacant unit readiness program as laid out in the preliminary budget is in contrast to the mayor's housing blueprint?
As I've stated, I think we're continuing our conversations with OMB to make sure we're aligning the funding that we need with our production volume in the program, and those conversations are ongoing.
If you had to answer yes or no to that question.
I would stick with my last answer.
Not surprised. Let's talk a bit about the vouchers. Is NYCHA concerned about the possibility of a reduced Section 8 voucher appropriation due to the change in Congress?
We're not currently concerned. We do feel as though our vouchers that we've been getting through HUD, we've been getting funding for all the vouchers that we currently have. We also have some reserves on hand that can be used in the program. So we are not currently concerned about the appropriation.
So in relation to the Independent Budget Office's report that noted the dependence of a voucher that is extremely high for the trust success, that brings you no concern at this moment?
No, we have not selected properties yet for the trust, so we do believe that we have enough time to line things up appropriately.
And I will say that just last year, Congress appropriated $337 million in TPVs, the most in recent history and 3 times recent appropriations.
I'm not surprised by that, but just this year, we have a Congress that is including climate deniers.
That's a fair point.
I have no confidence. Does NYCHA receive any tenant protection vouchers?
So, no. Do you want to?
Does NYCHA receive any tenant protection vouchers?
Just one second. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, sorry. I was blanking a little bit on this and what you're referring to. Obviously, we don't receive TPVs directly. Our PAC development partners receive TPVs through the PAC RAD program and the specific deals that we close with them.
In terms of switching very quickly around to homelessness and special populations housing, you noted earlier a pretty significant decrease in the number of homeless households that were served. That is very concerning. Can you explain to us what resources what resources in the budget NYCHA allocates to help homeless families get placed in the agency?
I don't know that we have a specific program that helps homeless families, but of course, through our programs, we are supporting all the families that enter NYCHA, whether they were experiencing homeless previously or not.
Okay, so no specific funding source to address that issue?
No, we do not.
Okay. In terms of the emergency transfer priority designed to protect victims of crimes such as domestic violence that is struggling with the PMMR reporting, a decrease in resident approved for transfer by 61%. We're hearing some intimidated victim transfers are waiting well over a year. What is NYCHA doing to improve the performance of transfers?
Thank you, Councilmember. We understand how important those transfers are to these residents that are experiencing violence. We have a total of 2,330 emergency transfers pending right now, and about 76 of those are flagged as VAWA transfers or Violence Against Women's Act transfers.
Can you repeat those numbers, Eva? I'm sorry.
Sure. We have 2,330 emergency transfers total, and 76% of those are for VAWA, or domestic violence transfers.
And how long have those transfers been in existence for, or their life average?
I don't have that information in front of me right now, but those transfers are waiting for the vacant units that we've been discussing. So, there is a significant time that they are waiting for the transfer process.
So we have emergency transfers that are waiting for thousands of units to get ready. And the PEG cuts the vacant unit readiness program. Deeply, deeply concerning. Okay, in terms of the PMMR states that there are now nearly 30,000 residents and 15,000 units at the 58 developments who are part of PACT. The city's Section 8 public-private partnership under HUD. How many are anticipated to be part of PACT by the end of fiscal '23? I know you gave the big number earlier in your testimony.
Yes, that's right. So by the end of fiscal '23, so by this June, we've had some recent conversions or closings. I don't think we are forecasting specific closings within the next 3 months. So the number would be the same as today, which would be the about 16,000 that have converted to date.
And then by fiscal '24, do you have an anticipated number?
I don't have that exact number for you, Chair Vilas, but we'll follow up with that.
How does PACT impact the 5-year financial plan? For example, if the exit of units from Section 9 counted, is the exit of units from Section 9 counted in declining rent revenue? And what are the savings accrued by moving units to PACT?
That's a great question. Thank you so much, Chair. So we do include our PACT pipeline as best we know it when we approve the budget into the 5-year financial plan. So we take into account a couple different things. First, of course, as you mentioned, the revenue. So we do decrease the tenant rent revenue over time as the units exit the portfolio. But with regard to the operating subsidy, there's a bit of a phase out, so you don't fall off the cliff with the operating subsidy immediately. You actually have 2 years. And it steps down over that 2-year time horizon. And then on the sort of expense side, you also see a reduction in things like our utilities related to those properties and all the various expenses, contracts, equipment, supplies, et cetera. So we do include that into our projections.
And is it the capital needs of those buildings also removed?
So Sean and his team are working through the P&A, and so I'll let him speak to how we consider PACT.
Yes, in general, that's right. Once a property converts through the PACT program, that fully addresses the 20-year capital needs for that site, and that no longer is a liability for NYCHA.
Got it. And what have been some of the challenges in the implementation of PACT that weren't foreseen pre-pandemic when the program was designed?
We've been learning in the PACT program as we go. So there are early deals pre-pandemic, and through those experiences and through the pandemic, we have, continued to refine the program very dynamically based on resident feedback and how the projects are going. I think that some of the challenges we've seen after the pandemic period relate to the earlier point that was made around the increases in the lead abatement standard that the city implemented. Which created additional requirements for deals that had already closed, as well as upcoming deals, right? And the implication being not only financial implications for the full cost of renovation, but also NYCHA putting in place strengthened oversight mechanisms to be able to ensure environmental abatement work is in line with our own requirements. So we've taken a number of steps around that piece. We went ahead and issued a policy that fully aligned the requirements that we apply within NYCHA with our PACT developers. We put in place additional oversight mechanisms. We brought in additional resourcing that is full-time focused on environmental abatement activities by PACT developers. And over time, we've been strengthening our overall asset management activities in terms of monitoring of PACT developer performance on work orders, on tenancy proceedings, and construction. I think the other area, not so much of challenge, but where we've grown is that a large number of closings, came completed during the pandemic or after the pandemic, and so we have many sites that are in construction today, and we have resourced up our construction oversight function that does regular visits to PAC sites, ensures that resident needs are being met during the construction period, that our standards of renovation are being met, et cetera.
And, for the record, unfortunately, Councilmember Barron, who is on the line, cannot speak directly to you because of outdated, weird regulations, but he has very strong concerns around how poorly PACT is operating in 2 developments in his district, including Linden Houses and Boulevard Houses. In addition to Councilmember Brewer and others who, it is emerging that these deals are not cutting it. And when residents are asking to go back to NYCHA and not be in this nebulous private developer, I think we need even a closer look at what exactly is happening here. When a program is not, what am I wanting to ask here? With the current Chelsea Houses article, that suddenly they're proposing demolishing the buildings. What does NYCHA, how does NYCHA engage with that conversation? Are they able to do such a thing? And what is NYCHA's engagement there?
Thank you, Chair Avila. So we are obviously very closely engaged in the Chelsea Fulton Elliott project. As the idea of, as you reference, taking a different approach to renovate or redevelop the properties has emerged, including, from many of the resident leaders of those properties. We have tried to be flexible to work based on whatever the resident needs are and resident preferences around how can we make that happen together with the development team that residents have selected. And so we are an active player in that conversation, ensuring that if there is any change in the project structure or the approach that's taken there, that's very much aligned with what is the priority for residents and what best preserves the housing quality and renovation.
How will residents be protected? And who makes ultimately that decision on the future of the development, whether they repair it as is or they decide they want to pursue demolishing?
So the approach to renovating the property, generally would not impact resident protections that are protected through the RAD program and that attach to these type of conversions, right? So we wouldn't expect to see any difference in the level of resident protection depending on the ongoing discussion at Chelsea Fulton. The ultimate decision, right, depends on both where residents land in this discussion, if the currently selected developer is able to meet the specific requirements, both of the residents of NYCHA and, obviously eventually of HUD as well, around the way that the renovation is structured, if it meets the full scope of renovation that's required.
So HUD would need to approve the plan? Yes. And residents would need to be involved. I'm not sure what that means. NYCHA would have to approve the plan? I'm sorry, thank you, Brian.
Sure.
I just want to be really clear with what these steps are.
Sure, and let me just be clear. I think Fulton Chelsea Elliott, the plan that was brought together not only the NYCHA community, but the entire community there. There were community board elected officials, the residents, both for and against. Residents continued to be involved in this process. And in fact, if you talk to the tenant association president at Chelsea and Fulton and Elliott Houses, they're the ones who are supporting this plan that's currently being proposed. We need to see the final details, but nothing can happen on its own. A joint plan that is supported by residents, that is supported by the community, that is supported by NYCHA, will be put forth, and no demolition can happen without HUD approval. And can I just also talk about the two other projects that were mentioned before? I think it really needs to be pointed out that Boulevard and Linden were built by the state. They received no funding whatsoever for many, many years, and they fell into disrepair, where I sometimes used to say that the developments were eating themselves because of years and years of disinvestment. Not like regular disinvestment, like, that we see, in NYCHA. I'm talking about total abandonment. And so we needed to find a funding source to bring those properties, which are both very large properties, up to a state of good repair. Weiss Towers, it fell into the same bucket. It was locally built. It needed a funding source. Usually the most frustrating times in these projects to tenants is year one of the project, because that's when we're doing the most significant construction. That's where we are replacing elevators. That's where we're replacing boiler systems. That's where we're getting inside people's apartments. And no one knows better than you, council member, living in a construction site, as your residents have at Red Hook for about 10 years, is frustrating is too weak of a word. It is really both physically and emotionally very tough on tenants, but come back in year 2, come back in year 3, when the renovations have been done, and then you ask tenants, are you happy? And I've been to those developments where in year 1, they said, Brian, could you please come back? In year 2 and 3, they say, it's nice to see you, but you're leaving, right? So there definitely is a, transformation at some point, but that first year is really frustrating.
I appreciate that, and as someone who survived a renovation over a 6-month period, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And when it turns into 5 years, even more so. And that's not even counting the conditions prior, right? So this is like years and years in the making. So I hear that, and obviously Boulevard and Linden have a particular subset of issues. Nevertheless, I think my role here is to lift up my colleagues' call for serious problems occurring there. It is not the first and only set of problems that are occurring in PAC sites. We're hearing more and more of it from our colleagues. And so we are here flagging it for you because there is an accountability responsibility for us. So I appreciate what you're saying, Brian. In terms of, let's, I guess, move to some talk about the pillar areas. NYCHA has shared that it's relying on external vendors as well as in-house capacity to meet the pillar areas compliance for mold, pest heats, elevators, and the like. What's the split between the contracted and in-house spending on the pillar areas?
Thank you for that question. So the 2023 contract budget across all the pillar areas is around $101 million. And if you think about it in total, the operating budget for the pillar areas in total is around $380 million. So it's probably about a 1-to-2 split in that regard.
And so the 1-to-2 is outside contractors?
Correct. So contracts in general, 101 million.
In-house, okay.
Right, and then around 270 million would be the in-house capacity.
Got it, thank you. And boilers are a primary concern among capital projects. How many boilers will be replaced through the traditional Section 9 capital versus PACT projects? And is NYCHA on track to hit its goal by 2026?
Yes, so we are targeting to replace 320 boilers in that period through 2026. So slightly above the HUD agreement target of 300 through the capital investment side. And then we similarly have a target under the HUD agreement to address 200 boilers through the PAC program, which we've already surpassed, and plan to address several hundred more through the PAC program in that period.
So the 200 boilers through PACT were already done
That's
in
right.
prior years. So is there a goal for those boilers in PACT through the 2026 period?
Yes, I can give you, rather than a goal, an estimate of how many more currently we're projecting based on the conversions that are in progress. We're expecting about an additional 650 or so boilers through PAC. Now, part of the reason why the numbers are large is that some of the PAC sites are smaller developments, and they often would have multiple small boilers in their buildings rather than a large campus with a central heating plant. So that skews the numbers a little bit, but it's still a significant amount through the PAC program.
Right, but these are 650 boilers that are being paid by the developers, not as capital.
Yes,
for
through the financing that's raised through the PAC conversion.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, NYCHA struggled to replace elevators, fixing only 8 rather than its target of 100 in the end of '22. Tell us what the plan is to pick up the pace on elevator repairs. Why did we only do 8?
Sure, there are probably...
NYCHA be able to hit its target of 275 by the end of 2024?
Yeah, at an overall level, we do anticipate still meeting that target. The two major drivers of the delays in that program at an overall level, first, significant delays in procuring the number of vendors across a large number of projects at one time. That both stems from some of our internal challenges, but also from kind of industry and market capacity. I think more importantly, in the last year, supply chain issues have really impacted within construction, the elevator area. So we've seen significant delays due to availability of different elevator parts, elevator paints, and other aspects. So that's unfortunately why we did not progress as far as we had hoped by the end of 2022. Many of those projects are now in construction or moving into construction, and I think earlier in the testimony, Lisa quoted that we would have over 160 elevators in construction this year at some point in 2023, completing this year or next year, and we have an additional pipeline of elevator projects moving to construction in 2024. Therefore, we're still expecting to surpass that 275 number.
And how long does it, in construction phase, how long does that generally average?
So elevators are a little bit interesting in that the majority of the construction is off-site where they're fabricating the actual elevator. In many cases, the on-site construction is only a few months. Now, obviously, if it's a large campus with many buildings and you would phase the construction of the elevators across those buildings, the campus itself, could have an 18-month construction period. But, there's a 3 to 6 month or longer lead time where they're fabricating off-site. One of the things, in answer to your earlier question, one of the ways we're mitigating further supply chain related delays in the future is by pushing vendors to make those purchases earlier, to bring more materials on-site earlier, and to kind of stockpile so that when they are ready for on-site construction, that can move more quickly.
Thank you. Are you seeing improvements in supply chain issues, or do they remain?
I think we're seeing improvements in supply chain issues, either because some of those issues have worked themselves out, or because we're working with vendors to find alternative, painting sources or things like that, working with the manufacturers in a number of cases as well. So I do think that some of those are being resolved. I think the industry capacity is also starting to anticipate and match the large number of procurements we're putting out there.
Got it. And how much is NYCHA spending on the monitor agreement, and where is that in the budget?
So happy to provide that. The 2023 budget for the pillar areas is $1.9 billion across operating and capital. So as mentioned, it's actually $382 million in operating and $1.485 billion in capital sources, and that is spread across the budget. So you see it in specific areas. You see it in our elevator department, heating, pest and waste, lead, mold, and then in the 3 compliance departments of compliance, quality assurance, and environmental health and safety.
And the total, do you have a total amount for that?
Sure, it's 1.9 billion. Oh, do you mean the NYCHA monitor, or?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I was like, that's not right.
Thank you. So we do not pay for the monitor. So NYCHA spends no money on the monitor. So in our budget, it is zero.
Got it. It wasn't I wasn't
Just in
trying to
case you
catch
cared about the
anything.
pillars. There you go.
In terms of the PMMR suggests repair times are still a serious challenge, with the average time to resolve non-emergency repairs increasing 48% from 39.5 days in the first 4 months of fiscal '22 to 58.4 in the same fiscal period for '23. 2 months remains unacceptable wait time. What is the assessment of the problem, and what is the solution that we are implementing? We
Thank
talk
you.
a lot about this.
Thank you, Councilmember. And before I answer that question, if you'd allow me, I did receive the information on voluntary payment plans. We've done 826 voluntary payment plans so far, in regards to your arrears question earlier.
826.
26.
And that's across
All the boroughs.
all the boroughs. What's your guess of how much that represents in terms of the people in arrears?
I don't have that, but we will definitely follow up with you on that. Do you
I
have
mean,
it?
if you think about it, it's 826 of 73,000 people, so very small. But to the point that we're making earlier, it's difficult to encourage a tenant with a pending EREP application to come down and, apply for a payment plan. They really do think that the EREP application will get a determination, and they really are, in their minds, expecting money from the state. So, as we've all mentioned, they owe over $6,000, their income's only $24,000, so they really, from, a financial position, find it pretty difficult to engage in payment plans. And I don't know that we've mentioned this, but we're not allowed to forgive the rent. So, we're doing the best that we can to collect with the resources that we have.
Sure, so the 826 families, of course, one family is an achievement and is great. 826 is nice. 75,000 households is astronomical. So while I appreciate how difficult it is, obviously, to get people there, the point of the question is knowing that's less than 2% of the residents that are facing this issue. And so what is it that we have to do, right? What is it that the agency has to do additionally to make sure that we do better than 2%, right? Because this is a critical issue for the agency's success in order to collect the rents. And also the financial impact on families, right? If in fact families go into eviction proceedings, they will be barred from other subsidized housing in other states. This could be a lifetime impact for residents for a whole number of reasons. So it's not for saying you're not trying, but to clearly quantify that we need to do something different and greater, and our city also needs to pitch in here, right? These are New Yorkers. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the numbers. I don't even remember where we were.
I will remind you, you asked about repair times.
There we are, our favorite topic.
NYCHA is constantly monitoring our repair times. We review the data. As you know, at the end of 2022, we finished our rollout of our work order reform program, which decentralized skilled trades to the neighborhoods and also added a neighborhood planner for residents to schedule their repair needs. So we've created a single point of contact for residents to reach out to and to really work with to schedule the repairs at their convenience so that we reduce the amount of times we're knocking on a door with nobody home. However, we continue to face significant time delays in achieving the full and complete repair job. Part of work order reform was also about improving how we sequence and schedule repairs. So previously, you would have the plumber come, and we wouldn't schedule the plasterer until the plumber finished the work. We wouldn't schedule the painter until the plasterer finished. Now we are scheduling everything in order to try to get them right after each other in consecutive steps. However, we are facing still delays in that scheduling due to staffing constraints, but also due just to the enormity of our workload that we're dealing with. And COVID really impacted that significantly. Our work order backlog has grown 88% from the start of COVID in March 2020 to now in March 2023. For about 18 months or so, we had restrictions on how much work we could do within a unit because of COVID restrictions. And so we were only sending staff into residents' homes to really repair the most emergency life, health, safety conditions. And so now we're working as hard as we can to catch up on that work and to get through a lot of those work orders that remained and since COVID.
Thank you. So does NYCHA need more staff to help manage capital work?
So as Lisa explained in the testimony, we do have a shortage of resources to fully manage the growing portfolio that we have because our capital portfolio has increased significantly, since 2019 through today and continues to grow. Our resourcing needs have grown along with that, and currently, given our operating budget situation, we can't meet that.
That's okay. I thought we maybe had to evacuate or something. So. Apologies. Continue.
No, I can just repeat that, as Lisa mentioned earlier, because of the operating budget leading to some staffing constraints within our capital projects teams, we are pausing a number of projects, so that is obviously indicative of the fact that we have a small resource shortage.
So Sean, the answer is yes, we need more staff to manage capital projects.
Yes, to manage the full funding allocation we have, we would need more staff.
Thank you. Has NYCHA accepted and implemented all of the monitor's expertise on how to manage capital projects? If not, what has happened and why?
So we work very closely with the monitor team that's specifically staffed to work on capital projects, including a number of sub-consultants they use who have industry experience in this area. We work collaboratively around making various improvements. We meet multiple times a month. So I do believe we've taken on a significant portion, if not all, of the recommendations and expertise that they've brought.
So there were no particular areas that you had concerns with or did not implement?
So since I've been in my role, which is a little bit over a year now, we've had a very collaborative working relationship. And that is the point, I believe, when the monitor also brought in more capital projects focused experts to work with us. I do believe in previous years, early after the agreement, there were areas of dispute around different portfolios, but we have a very positive working relationship and appreciate kind of the additional oversight that they bring.
Great. And in terms of what resources would be needed to allow all the council discretionary funded projects to flow more quickly?
So for us to be able to not have to pause these 50 council funded projects, we would need in the range of $5 to $10 million additional staffing budget to be able to manage those effectively. Obviously, I'm giving you a range because it depends on some other variables around how we allocate the funding, how we staff the projects, and other priority needs NYCHA has given our operating budget situation.
So 5 to 10 million in expense funding, right, for your operational funding?
That's right. Thank you for clarifying that. City and state capital funding cannot be used for our staffing expenses, so therefore it would need to be some other funding source.
Got it. Thank you for that. In terms of the city funding for this fiscal year, can you tell us again what's the total amount of city operational funding for NYCHA?
Sure. In 2023?
Yes.
Sure. So in 2023, The city has budgeted $1.4 billion in capital and $375 million in expense. In addition, they've forgiven around $100 million in payments.
The last part, I'm sorry.
They've forgiven $100 million in payments, so revenue that we would have otherwise had to provide to them.
And for fiscal '24?
Sure, in fiscal '24, in fiscal '24, the amount is slightly higher. It is it's a little bit lower, 224 million in expense and 1.7 billion in capital.
And for fiscal '23, the 1.4 capital was specifically for RAD impact, is that correct?
No, it's actually a split. So there is 741 million in capital funding for the agreement and our other capital projects, and there's 668 million in PACT funding for a total of 1.4.
And for the 1.7 for fiscal '24, is there a split there as well?
Yes, there is. So the split there is 1.5 billion in agreement funding for NYCHA to meet the HUD agreement pillar areas and also our capital projects, and there is only 156 million for PACT for a total of 1.7 billion.
But from '23 to '24, there's a significant decrease in terms of operating funding.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay. In terms of the total amount of cuts, in terms of contracts, can you tell us, NYCHA has removed all non-essential contract spending in central office departments for fiscal '23 to save $25 million. What type of contracts should we expect to see to be eliminated? What does that mean?
Sure, that's a great question, Chair. So our budget doesn't cut specific contracts. We leave that up to the departments to decide. So it essentially reduces spending authority in the central office department and contracts. So in the case of finance, for example, you'd see a cut in my contract budget, and then as an EVP and a head of a department, I'd have to decide where I can supplement with my staff or supplement with additional resources throughout the authority. So we don't cut specific contracts, but as mentioned, it's clear to say that we have not cut the contracts at the properties, for the pillar areas, or in our leased housing Section 8 program.
Got it, but everything goes downhill, so at some point, the residents will feel it, so it's good to understand kind of what that looks like. What is the total amount of cuts from fiscal '22 to '23?
Oh, okay. So as mentioned, our contract budget went down by 25 million, and then we saved another 12 million in cutting the vacant budgeted positions, and then we've made small cuts in other places where we could. We tried to cut supplies where appropriate, equipment if we could, but part of the challenge is that, while we can try our best to cut on the discretionary items, there are things that are in our expenses that are outside of our control, for example, like our utilities. But Sean and his team have been working very closely to kind of make our capital assets more sustainable over time.
And how much is NYCHA cutting red tape to get stuff built?
So I can talk a little bit about that. We have been very active participants in both the citywide capital reform task force and in the Get Stuff Built effort with a range of agencies, including Department of Buildings. So through the task force, I think the notable changes that have been made to Comptroller's Directive 10, where we've been a very active participant, will help move our city-funded projects significantly faster. We've also worked directly with the comptroller on a number of streamlining of process improvements that will shave or have already started shaving significant time off of that aspect of our capital projects. Through the Get Stuff Built effort, where there are, I think, over 111 or 111 changes agreed, there are 3 that are NYCHA specific, and there are a much larger subset where we would benefit from that are, other agencies would also benefit from. So in particular, the 3 areas that we focused on were around our coordination and engagement with Department of Buildings, given the type of work we do, approval processes for our properties and assets that have a lot of historic violations or other aspects to them can be quite complicated. And so aligning on a more effective coordination model, single point of contact, being able to eliminate some of these historic violations that are not relevant anymore, as well as, there's a provision in Get Stuff Built to agree a different potential set of rules for historic buildings or older buildings, right, that are, like NYCHA's buildings, will face a lot of challenges to meet some of the new code requirements, right, and it would allow us to also move projects faster. So we've been closely involved in those efforts and do believe that they'll have a significant benefit on our project timelines.
And how much is NYCHA using for design build?
So our design build portfolio to date kind of has 2 main components. We initiated a series of design build projects out of the HUD agreement for our heating systems work. So we have a range of boiler replacement projects that use design build. I'll come to the exact numbers in a moment. The other main area that we are utilizing design build is our comprehensive modernization portfolio. Lisa mentioned earlier in the testimony that we have almost $850, $900 million across 4 large projects there. We were also leveraging a design build approach to be able to be more cost effective and move those projects forward more effectively. And if I can't find the exact design build numbers, we can also send those to you as a follow-up.
And are you finding efficiencies with the process? And how are you tracking that?
We are. I think we're seeing 2 main benefits. One of those is the efficiencies you're mentioning in terms of cost and timeline, especially with NYCHA's properties that are subject to a lot of unknown site conditions and surprises. By having the design and the construction entity be the same entity, they're able to deal with those risks more effectively, and we believe we'll see cost benefits, but in particular we'll see timeline and quality benefits from that. The obvious other benefit is that design build inherently allows the design and the construction to happen more collaboratively and in parallel. And so we're seeing, for example, normally our projects can get held up with a lot of what are called RFIs between the construction vendor and the design vendor. Mm-hmm. Those type of things are all internal to the design build entity, so we don't have to deal with that, and we don't see those type of things slowing up projects.
Got it. And you're seeing improved timeframes of how much on average with this new process?
I think we'll be able to assess that when some of our design build heating projects close off, because we have about, I think, 23 of them active to really see what the gains have been. I would mention the other reason that we use design build in both of these programs is because it allows for more innovation in the type of solutions. We've definitely seen that in the heating program, as I mentioned earlier, through use of geothermal and other type of unique technologies. That a traditional design bid out the way we do would not probably have landed us with that type of innovation.
Thank you. Just to switch very quickly to the trust. How much money has the NYCHA expended on the trust?
So it's actually quite small. I think we spent less than $100,000 on the trust to date, keeping in mind that it was passed just recently.
And do you know how much NYCHA has expended on the transformation plan? Goes back a couple years.
I don't have that number in front of me, but we could get back to you.
And when should we expect to see a permanent CEO announced and a full board seated at the Preservation Trust?
We're hopeful that within the next couple of weeks, the board will be announced for the trust. And once that happens, it would be the board's responsibility to pick a president of the trust.
And in the testimony, it was noted in terms of the trust that residents at select sites will begin voting this year. What are those sites and who determined them?
So, council member, we, as you know, the legislation gives NYCHA the ability to convert 25,000 units. We are looking at a number of different factors that will go into choosing the first sites. The first is resident support to do something, to have a conversation on what is the best strategy to move forward. So that's a big factor. The other factor is need. We will be announcing the sites we will be announcing sites in the next quarter. We'll make sure that you know well in advance. But resident input is big here.
I think I missed. So resident support to do something.
Correct.
90% of the residents. And then the next criteria?
90% is, no, I didn't say 90%.
And the next criteria was what?
And the next criteria is need.
Need.
Yes.
Do you want to say more about that?
Sure. Just, so there is need, in terms of overall capital need, but then there's also some places where there's immediate need, right? There are some properties that we're looking of, maybe their number isn't huge, but if we don't do something soon, we fear for the long-term health of the property.
Great. I'd love to see a clear rubric around how this is like 90% of the portfolio. I still don't understand how you make a decision based on that.
Well, I think that first, in terms of the resident willingness to, have a conversation about the future of the development, I think, we've heard from a lot of people is that, I don't want to be first. I want to see how you guys do this, and then I'll judge. We also have conversations with some residents saying, I'm ready, and they're saying, I don't know what it is I want to choose, but, it could be rad, it could be packed, it could be, in the end of the day, after I listen to you guys go on about those two programs, I might decide that, I'm going to stick with what I have, but all I know is I want something.
Okay. Does the budget for resident engagement go up or down from fiscal 22 to 23?
That's a great question. I think I will have to get back to you on that one.
But just to clarify, you noted $100,000 to date, not necessarily this fiscal year in terms of
on the trust, correct?
On the trust engagement efforts. And do you have a projection of how much you would spend moving forward, or is there a project goal, or a project budget for this in particular?
So I think it would sort of, to Brian's point, it would depend on the timelines for the ramp up when the residents actually decide to join the trust, which projects end up going through the trust, and then we would sort of form the budget accordingly.
So there's no allocated resources as of yet in the budget?
Not in this budget, no.
And the $100,000 that was spent to date, has that mostly been to design a voting process, or
it's mostly been on some consultant support, so the support to actually stand up the trust. So it's a new organization. It requires an EIN number, for example.
to do the structural work,
Exactly.
but not
And then
for
some
the resident
small-
engagement portion.
I think there's some small funding, but at this stage, as Brian said, we're still trying to select sites, so we haven't made any significant spend on the trust.
Got it. I think. All right, I'm gonna ask you like just two more questions, and then we're gonna open it up for public comment. In terms of local law 97 and the greening of NYCHA, what is the anticipated cost of local law 97 implementation, and how is NYCHA preparing for this?
So the anticipated cost for meeting local law 97 commitments over the next few decades is, our approximate estimate is about $10 billion. That's additional to the $40 billion number that folks usually quote from our 2017 physical needs assessment. About half of that is heating systems related work, as well as directly related improvements in the buildings. The other half of that is broader work in the buildings around the envelope and insulation and things like that that are required for energy efficiency and electrification upgrades, things like that for moving towards electrified buildings.
Got it. I mean, one of the things we know is that the development costs obviously have risen, inflation through the roof, interest rates. How much additional capital is needed in the next fiscal year to meet the existing capital repair goals?
So, I mean, we have the capital funding we need to meet, our existing capital plans, obviously, right? So now, in terms of your question, it's not that we face a gap in capital funding. We've planned our work around, the 5-year plan and the funding we expect to receive from different sources. That's not to say that if we, we're able to secure additional capital funding, that we can then not use that effectively, but depending on the type of funding and the amount of funding, right, we could initiate, larger projects or more projects.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying in the planning, you are taking into account inflation, interest rates, and all these other dynamic elements that impact the capital projects already.
That's right. So maybe to clarify my answer, for this year, right, our capital projects are budgeted. We typically do look at a multi-year view. So we would look at inflation or interest rates. We would look at supply chain issues we've seen and how that might impact costs. When we're looking out several years, obviously, those factors, will significantly impact what we can do with funding that we have allocated in the next few years.
Can you tell me what would make a material difference for the work that you're each pursuing in NYCHA in terms of capital and expense dollars that you would need to materialize the work that you're doing? And I'd like each of you to answer it. You start.
So I would like $466 million in tenant rent arrears.
From whom?
Well, we will take it from anywhere we can get it, but preferably starting with the state, as we've mentioned, with the ERAP program. We'd be really grateful for any support that we receive from our federal, state, city partners. And of course, it'd be helpful to also, as we've all mentioned here, work with the tenants to be able to give them a fresh start.
I'll just settle for the $353 million we've asked the state for. Again, to put our tenants on the same footing as their neighbors who are not living in subsidized housing, and would also give us the operating dollars that we so desperately need.
Then I guess I'll choose capital dollars since you both went with operating, but I sincerely believe that the capital work that Sean and his team have been doing is critical to the operation side, and that, you know, many of the repairs that you see in the backlog are repairs that are happening over and over again because the conditions of our buildings are so deteriorated. And so we may, you know, arrive today to fix a plumbing leak only to have that leak return, you know, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you know, whenever again, or in a different part of the pipe. We really need, you know, major stack replacements. So the work that we're doing on the operating side is really Band-Aids at this point while we wait for all of the different capital proposals that we now have at our fingertips to really come through for us.
So I'll build on Eva's point, right? What would help us the most is to be able to do more large integrated projects like the comprehensive modernizations that we've kicked off. These are much more effective and efficient in terms of delivering renovations. They also are the best way to minimize tenant disruption by doing a large-scale renovation, but really covering everything in the property at once. And in particular, I would focus on two areas that, you know, funding is really critical. One is plumbing or waste and water lines. It's very difficult to renovate those parts of buildings without doing a full-on gut rehab of the building. And so that has become a major driver of our operating costs, and we're not able to undertake the fundamental upgrade of the plumbing that we'd like to because we don't have enough funding to, you know, do the branch piping in the rooms, the kitchens and bathrooms, et cetera. So those are large dollar capital amounts like the comprehensive modernization we need. The second area is really our Clean Heat for All challenge. Our ability to quickly scale up the window heat pumps and alleviate many of the challenges that our heating systems are creating in our properties, you know, would really be a game changer for us in the next few years. And so that's an area we could very quickly use a lot of additional funding.
Thank you all for indulging me in that. And I would say we got to aim higher, y'all. Like, 330 million is clearly not enough. But I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you for answering today's questions. I have one more question around hiring. Is NYCHA free to hire up to its budgeted headcount, or does OMB restrict those hires?
That's correct. NYCHA is free to hire up to our budgeted headcount, and OMB does not restrict our hiring plans.
Does not restrict it at all. Y'all are lucky. I guess with that, we can move to public comment. Thank you for answering the questions, and we look forward to receiving the follow-up information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For anyone willing to, wishing to testify in person here, if you have not, please fill out an appearance card at the Sergeant at Arms desk. We'll shortly call the first panel. For those wishing to testify online, we will call upon you after the in-person testimony is done. A reminder to all members of the public who testify, we would encourage you to submit written testimony via email at testimony@council.nyc.gov or through the council website at council.nyc.gov/testify. The first two members of the public to testify in person, Marquise Jenkins and Jessica Yeager, can come up to the table. If you could identify yourself for the record, and then you can begin.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Yeager. Good afternoon, Chair Aviles and members of the committee. I am the project director at the Red Hook Community Justice Center, and I'm here today representing our umbrella organization, the Center for Justice Innovation, formerly known as the Center for Court Innovation. So since its inception, the center has supported the vision shared by the council of a fair and effective and humane justice system and public safety built through sustainable, community-driven solutions that cultivate vibrant neighborhoods. The work we do to expand housing justice is central to that vision. This year, we're seeking $550,000 in new council funding to support our Housing Navigators program, which provides assistance to low-income tenants in New York City to achieve housing stability. In Red Hook and beyond, Housing Navigators at many of our community justice centers and our Legal Hand program work directly with New York City residents who are facing housing instability, whether through the threat of eviction, the need for permanent housing, or living conditions that pose risks to safety and well-being. Much of this work is with tenants living in public housing. While New York City has made significant investments in attorneys for low-income renters, our Housing Navigators work with residents who are facing housing instability to find solutions before evictions are pending. We also help tenants navigate the legal process when they don't have access to counsel. And our Housing Navigators support tenants in obtaining critical home repairs, preserving affordability, preventing evictions, and finding justice and fair treatment in housing court. In FY24, we are seeking new funding through an expansion of the Council's Community Housing and Preservation Strategies Initiative to support Housing Navigators in Staten Island, Harlem, Brownsville, Red Hook, Crown Heights, Jamaica, and Tremont. This work is currently supported by congressional funding that's due to sunset in late 2023. With City Council support, we will be able to continue to provide this important program for public housing tenants and other low-income renters. And in my last, I ran out of time. I just wanted to say a quick word on the NYCHA arrears issue. Is it okay if I just?
Yes,
okay.
please.
I just wanted to thank you, Chair Aviles, for your leadership on this issue and for all of the questions you were just asking NYCHA about this. As you know, because we've been working with your office on this, we're very concerned about the uncertainty and the looming threat of eviction that's hanging over the head of NYCHA residents across the city. We see it in Red Hook every day. And we really urge the council to continue to work with government partners to find a solution to this difficult problem, and we are looking forward to partnering with you in any way we can. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, thank you. I'd like to just ask you a quick question before you head out. Can you tell us for the record what you are seeing in terms of the tenant experience with the rental arrears, and if you are seeing I guess this pending eviction situation and the support that NYCHA says it is providing to tenants?
Right, of course, Chair Aviles. So in Red Hook, we operate a housing court that's jurisdiction is the Red Hook houses. So all of the cases in the Red Hook houses come to our court to be resolved, and we have a housing resource center that works very closely with tenants in the NYCHA houses to address non-payment issues and a host of other issues that come up in their housing. And we helped people apply for ERAP back when the application portal was open. We helped thousands of people in the Red Hook houses apply, and ever since then, people have been living with this incredible uncertainty about what comes next. And as NYCHA acknowledged, and as you acknowledged in your questions, it's very hard for people to think about getting, paying their current rent when they have this huge looming debt hanging over their head. And so we work with people to figure out ways that they can move forward, but without an answer to the question of what's going to happen with those applications, there's just a tremendous amount of stress and uncertainty for people. And we are very worried about the evictions that are likely to follow if there is not a solution to this problem.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for all the work that you do in our community and many others across the city. It makes a huge difference to have you there working with the tenants. And I guess I just want to ask one last thing. What recommendations would you put on the table for the record with regard to this issue in particular?
Well, we're very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're very much hoping, like everyone else here today, it seems, that there will be a solution from the state. The state created this problem by deprioritizing people in subsidized housing, which was clearly a big mistake. So we, like others, are fighting to try to make sure that it's a priority for the state. But if not, the city has to step up and help solve this problem. And that might involve having to go to the feds and asking for some cooperation there as well. We very much are interested to hear what NYCHA's plans A, B, and C are when they're, BCD, as they said, when they're ready to talk about that. But clearly there needs to be a solution here. A non-solution isn't an option, so there's got to be a solution.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So next, we'll hear from Ms. Annette Tomlin, and then after her, John Rusk. You can come up to the podium and go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for hearing me out today. Mine is really plain and simple. At this point in time, I do not understand how, if NYCHA knows that it needs $40 billion and it's only asking for the minimum, and that's not even a minimum. When I look at 10,000 pennies and they're not even offering a half, that's ridiculous, okay? And over the years, 30 years of failure, I don't understand why they don't think that they should be held negligent and responsible for all the years that have just been neglected, okay? Mismanagement and everything. I live in Brook Ellen Houses. I've been a resident there for almost 25 years. I would have loved to have had the American dream of owning a home, but that's not going to happen, especially when you get rid of public housing. The thought of getting rid of public housing is totally ridiculous. We have a housing crisis. We're dealing with a shelter issue. People that are living in shelters have vouchers. They're not being called. They're talking about the short of staff. It's just, I just can't fathom all of this happening. And in the greatest city of New York, I mean, really, we're looking at America. What are we becoming, a third world country? This is ridiculous. It's uncalled for. It's unacceptable. And as far as the tenants, yes, we do have a responsibility, grant you that, but with the living conditions and people living in despair, you can't expect that. So who is at blame? We're all to blame, okay? But definitely with NYCHA, the management companies, the vendors, they're doing jobs that are not actually being completed, how would you say, completely completed correctly. Cosmetic. They're just giving materials that's just fix me up. You just said repairs, okay? Fitting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound is ridiculous. I don't understand how we continue to let them do this here. And at this point in time, wouldn't blame really if people just didn't pay their rent at all. Really, they shouldn't, okay? Because they're like the health conditions. The gentleman spoke about, he spoke about the lead condition last time I was going to speak. I believe his name was Joel, okay? And he was talking about the contaminants, the toxins. I get kind of excited, so again, just bear with me. It's just that something needs to be done, and what's not being done is obvious. And at this point in time, I just think, Charles Barron, again, I'm from his district. He was here last time, and he's, definitely a forefront spearhead, trying to fight for all of us. But he's just one person. So again, with the mobility and organization of different tenants, they need to get together. A lot of people are not aware of what's going on. They don't understand the language. We wasn't even aware of this ERAP. At least I wasn't. I'm thankful that I was able to pay my rent. Okay, I believe in even making we call it a just fair statement in a sense where as you say, well, show good faith. That's it is, right? Show good faith. To just prove that you are willing to just care for where you live. So what is it that we're not doing? It's not so much of the tenants, it's actually the responsibility of each one of you here, along with all the persons that we put in these positions of elected officials that are not doing their job as well. So accountability on every part. So again, I just thank you for just hearing me out. I know my time was spent, but we need more than 3 minutes. We need 3 hours, if not 30 years, okay, the same time that y'all just, messed this up. Not you all particularly, but definitely those who are responsible, okay? And again, like I said, if the state doesn't do it, at this point in time, what are we going to look like? Everybody's going to be homeless? It's not even affordable. It's about low income. What's feasible for you might not be feasible for me.
That's right.
Okay, people that are on fixed incomes, what are you going to do with those persons? The senior citizens, it's just too much, okay? And just not for my generation, but for my son and my grandchildren's generations. So what are we saying here? So again, thank you.
Ms. Tomlin, thank you for your patience and sitting through the hearing. I know you've been here a long time, and for the 30 years that you've been putting up and watching this story, living this story. So I appreciate your frustration, and you are 100% right. It is all of our responsibility. Unfortunately, some who are in power have decided it is not their responsibility, and we have not yet held them to account. So we're here to hold them to account. We're here to extend our work with the residents to say, yes, at the governor's level, at the mayoral level, who control billions of dollars in funding, what they have provided is insufficient. And I would include our congressional members there as well. So thank you.
Nothing against my brothers and sisters, against the persons that are coming in to look for different, type of freedoms in that sense, okay, freedoms and liberties and everything, but again, that's extra 40,000 people that are here that might not actually have adequate housing versus the persons that are in shelters that have vouchers are not even being called. They said that they have 5,000 different vacancies in NYCHA. They're talking about this lead and asbestos and stuff like that. The OCC, that's the persons that they call for NYCHA. Okay, they go back and call NYCHA, and NYCHA didn't do the job the first time. So what is that entity even built there and created for? Okay, it's just got to stop.
Yeah.
It just has to stop. So again, I thank you all for just hearing me out and everything that you all are trying to do and stuff. But like you said, try is a good thing and make an effort, okay, but it just needs to get done.
Absolutely.
Okay, and we don't have up until 5 years, 10 years to wait. This is something critical at this point right here, right now.
Right, and we are here collectively demanding the mayor and the governor step in significantly more ways in terms of operating and capital money to address this situation for the urgent situation that it is. So really appreciate your testimony.
I'll be here more often and more frequent, okay, because we need more critical persons, okay, and again, I'll get it when I stop getting the jitters and stuff, but again, I'm trying to maintain because I'm really just pissed. You know, it's a thing, okay, I'm mad and I'm not gonna, so we're at that point and at that level, so again, God bless you all and just thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Rusk?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Committee Chair Aviles. I appreciate how seriously you take all this. I have but one page. I don't know if it'll be 3 minutes. I'll do my best. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on a topic we believe is crucial for the safety of the residents of public housing, as well as a cost-effective means of extending the useful life of the existing public housing stock. New York City has a unique opportunity to vastly improve our ability to monitor, record, and address the deficiencies in public housing, so that we might be able to assign the resources required to make public housing safer for the families who call these apartments home. This year, the New York City Council is expected to see the New York City Department of Buildings implement new rules for natural gas detection. Detectors are expected to be required for all New York City dwellings where natural gas appliances exist, and these rules will require a substantial investment of time and resources by NYC Public Housing. These new requirements are part of Local Law 157, which was passed in 2016 after the devastating losses of 8 lives in the 2014 East Harlem explosions and 2 more lives in the 2015 East Village explosions. Of special note to the City Council is that the DOB can decide to make these gas detectors monitored, which will certainly save residents and firefighters' lives. A cost-effective wireless network created within buildings to connect these gas monitors to 911 will also enable the city to address many of the persistent issues that public housing buildings face. With a low-cost network installed for the gas monitors, other small wireless sensors could be deployed, alerting building staff within seconds of water leaks, temperature, humidity, and exhaust fan malfunctions, and other operational and environmental concerns. These near-instant notifications will allow residents and service teams to stop water leaks, prevent freezing pipes, or determine if exhaust fans are operating properly. These specific malfunctions create mold, a leading cause of asthma. Other sensors will alert as soon as the boiler goes cold, if an elevator stops moving, and when a rodent is trapped, allowing swift cleaning and rebaiting so that infestations can be quickly addressed. All these issues are reported to building managers on a single application, and data is aggregated. This simple to-do list for building staff will keep work crews focused on addressing the issues that have plagued public housing. With concrete statistics, Section 8 and 9 housing can support their requests for resources. This effort to monitor public housing will take resources for the next few years, but it will make housing maintenance much more focused and efficient and will address the concerns expressed by the federal monitors. Certainly, tearing down and building new projects will always give a fresher start, but realistically, New York can only afford so many of these large-scale projects a year. With low-cost wireless monitored devices, the net cost to the city may be neutral while improving the quality of life in public housing. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions. And I brought the wrong one of these testimonies, so we'll email you the right one.
Great, thank you so much. What is the estimated cost?
So per sensor is around $65. So so just the water leaks, there might be one at the kitchen toilet, one at the one at the kitchen sink, one at the toilet, and one underneath the bathroom sink. So that's 3 monitors. So 3 times 65 is like $205. So not very much. And then there's a monthly cost of around $4 per unit. So for instance, for a 200-unit building, $39,000 would cover the water leakage, but those sensors last 10 years. That's part of this. It's an ultra-efficient system on a new technology. So the whole building could be outfitted for, say, $39 for just water leaks. But if you amortize that over 10 years, that's $3.9 thousand a year. And then the monitoring is like another $10,000 a year. And what it allows is the property management staff to note almost immediately when there's a leak, within 30 seconds.
Yeah, I appreciate the technology, and I think there's much technology that has been avoided. I think the one problem that it does not address is our lack of staffing to make the repairs that are required.
My suggestion is, when faced with these concrete numbers, in other words, if the federal government sees, okay, within 30 seconds, we know there's a leak under a sink, we know we've caught a mouse or a rat, we know that exhaust fans have gone out, we know that the boiler's gone cold. I recognize it's terrible that the federal government is refusing to fund NYCHA, but when you're faced with this data of exactly when the leaks happen, that it's in apartment 2111, that it's in apartment 6J, it's kind of, you can see the data of when it happened and you can see the data of when it's closed. Obviously, staff at NYCHA would be very concerned about these statistics because it's going to report a lot of leaks right away. And they'd rather just build brand new buildings. Not possible. And a child who's at age 3, who grows up with visible mold, is 700% more likely to have asthma. That's unacceptable. So my hope is that realistically, the push to Section 8 is, though I understand why, can't be done fast enough or realistically enough. The federal government just has to fund NYCHA. And I think the kind of statistics that this kind of program could do, this kind of monitoring, giving NYCHA just one pane of glass to see when the boilers don't work, when the elevators don't work, when there's water leaks, will force the kind of attention from the federal government that otherwise it's just a little bit anecdotal and repair logs. But this is clear data, when the leak happened, when it was cleared.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for
so
your
much for
testimony.
listening. I appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unless there's anyone else here to testify in person, we'll move on to the online testimony. Thank you very much. For the folks on Zoom who are willing to testify or wanting to testify, I will call your name and you'll receive an invitation to unmute yourself. You'll also have there'll be 2 minutes to testify. And we would encourage also any testimony be submitted to the council, again, through testimony@council.nyc.gov. The first member of the public on Zoom should be receiving an invite to unmute yourself, would be Ramona Ferreira.
Starting time.
You should be, Ms. Ferrier, you should be able to you should be getting an invite to unmute yourself shortly. Ms. Ferrier, you should be Ramona Ferrier, excuse me. Ferrier.
Are you able
Yes,
to hear
we
me?
can hear you now. You may start.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't doing the thing. Sorry. So good afternoon. I know there's gonna be like a timer somewhere. So I am Guatuque Ini Inaru. My colonial name is Ramona Ferreira, and I am a social entrepreneur, public housing tenant, and also the founder of Safe Section 9. But this testimony doesn't reflect our collective opinions. I'm here today to ask the council, unlike NYCHA, for $1.5 billion for Section 9 public housing. And I wish to see that accompanied by stronger oversight, which is clearly necessary to reach operational excellence, and earmarking the proceeds from legal marijuana sales to help offset that cost to the city and state. And finally, that money should also come with the caveat that we create a new public housing authority for New York City. This council has an opportunity to make it clear once and for all that public housing is the standard. Affordable housing, vouchers, tax credits, 421A, and other programs have not and cannot fulfill the housing needs of average New Yorkers making less than $65,000 a year. I'd like to highlight a couple of issues that I think are important based on the testimony that NYCHA gave. First, the trust continues to be NYCHA's priority, even against the wishes of tenants. While our homes deteriorated, NYCHA wasted unknown amounts. They did not include in that $100,000 the funding that they actually spent on consulting and on hiring New York City Action Lab in 2021. They also didn't include the consultants that prepared the materials for the blueprint, which is the first version of the trust. While they continue to focus on developing the trust and throwing money at privatizing 25,000 units against our wills, we have suffered, right? So pre-pandemic, I paid my rent, and Grams and I, my grandmother, we waited patiently for our repairs.
Time expired.
We're gonna, please continue.
Okay, so the pandemic killed my grandmother, and it sickened me twice. My neighbors at Mitchell Houses, we were amongst the top 10 developments, seeing deaths and infections according to the Department of Health Bronx site. This is why in 2021, in September of 2021, I started a collective rent strike. To this day, I have open work orders for my floor tiles, for the painting, which I finally finished my kitchen after 2 years because of my disability. That took me a really long time. And I continue to have a leak in my living room that's about a decade old. None of this has been taken care of. And I have not been contacted by management regarding my rent arrears, options, or any conversation, right, to address the fact that I have not been paying rent for that long. And I say proudly that I have been on rent strike for that long because I was publicly shamed by a HUD employee, Daniel Sherrod, in front of NYCHA staff. But it's my right to withhold rent when a legal contract such as my lease is not being upheld. There's a couple of things regarding the vacancy units that you guys raised today, which are very important. And I want to highlight who's actually impacted by the vacant units. We've heard a lot about homeless families, and we've heard a lot about people needing emergency transfers, but there's another population that we're completely looking over, and that's about 1,000 people that are sitting today on Rikers Island in unsafe conditions because judges are afraid to let them out, although they have been found innocent or have reached their time of release. And they're afraid to send them into the shelter system or onto the street. So every time that NYCHA neglects repairing a unit, another person possibly dies in a domestic violence situation from the toxins in their apartments or on Rikers Island. And the story regarding vacant units is not full, as my dear neighbor, Luciano, passed away in April of 2020, and he was the first one that we lost to COVID in my development, in my building, his unit continues to be empty. It is clean because I cleaned it after he died. I was his emergency contact person. His cabinets are in good condition. His refrigerator probably needs to get power washed, but his unit and the one next to me both sit empty while people are in the streets and in homeless shelters on Rikers Island. NYCHA also has not been upholding, the Section 9 guidance. They don't prioritize our homes. So we'll get notices telling us that there's going to be spackling and painting, and we find that our hallways are being repainted, but our units are sitting 10 years waiting to be painted, right? NYCHA continues to operate and made a budget request that really reflects their commitment to privatizing public housing. And when I say privatize, I mean shift any unit from Section 9 traditional public housing to the PAC or the RAD program. And NYCHA has been unable to prove or disprove the findings of Human Rights Watch, who sent them a letter and sent Congress a letter regarding the violation of tenant rights, the more likelihood to see eviction rates increase, which the comptroller is not looking at, and our quality of life decrease when you privatize units. Privatization cannot be the guiding principle of an organization that is supposed to overlook public housing in New York City. So this new housing authority needs to be explored. We need to stop seeing elected officials traveling to different cities, seeking inspiration from social housing and collective housing and all these other things. When in New York City, we're about to have 100,000 units left without leadership as NYCHA continues to focus itself on the 25,000 that are going to go into the trust. I'll leave it there, and I'm open for questions. And I also have all of the evidence and supporting articles and research regarding my testimony. I can submit that with the written testimony.
First, thank you, Ms. Ferreira, for waiting patiently. I know you have been listening the entire time. I can't agree with you more around budget and policy, for that matter, that reflects the intention around privatization. I think that's all arrows are pointing in the same direction, to our great dismay. In terms of work order reform, I think your experience tells us that that is not operating in your development. Is that correct? Yeah.
I had a visit from a team that was interested in learning whether or not I needed spackling. And when I showed them the water damage, which is in my living room and has been there for more than 10 years, they said that that wasn't their responsibility, that they don't spackle walls that have been damaged by anything more than regular usage, is what they explained. And they gave me the number to the Bronx office to follow up on my tickets for flooring and painting the unit and spackling of that section. But I've called that unit in the past, and I'm tired of getting upset over the same thing. So
yeah.
I put a bucket.
I understand. I'd love to see, I know you've put together in terms of expenses around the trust and Action Lab and the blueprint. Love to see those. And thank you for your testimony and your guidance and your fight to save Section 9.
Thank you for the hearing.
And again, testimony can be submitted to testimony@council.nyc.gov. The next person who should be receiving an invite to unmute yourself is Tanika Mapp.
Starting time.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much, City Council members, and thank you guys for having this important testimony. My name is Tamika Mapp. I'm the State Committee Woman for the 68th Assembly District. I'm just want to be on record to make sure that we keep our Section 9 in the forefront of everything, and making sure any money that is being allocated goes to the Section 9 portion of public housing instead of the Red PAC portion of public housing that has been in previous situations. So that's all my testimony is today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mapp. Thank you for being here in testimony.
The next member of the public will be Tanisha Grant. You should be receiving an invitation to unmute shortly.
Starting time.
Hello, thank you for having this hearing. My name is Tanisha Grant. I am the executive director of Parent Support and Parents New York. I am here on behalf of a lot of community members that we support that are in NYCHA. I also want to bring Councilman Charles Barron into the equation since he can't speak. What we want is, we want the city council to allocate money to NYCHA, public housing, Section 9. Last year, $1.3 billion was given to RAD and PACT, and none of that money was for NYCHA, for Section 9. We also like the idea of residents being in charge of facilitating their own buildings and being in charge of managing their own buildings under NYCHA. The people closest to the problem are to have the solutions. The people that have been living disenfranchised for decades are the ones who know how to fix the problem. It is mind-blowing that every time I come on these hearings, I see a whole bunch of white people, white men, and white women who have never lived in NYCHA, but have the authority of leadership of something that they know nothing about. That's one of the reasons why NYCHA, why public housing Section 9 has been disfranchised and underserved and undermanaged for so many years. Because the people that are managing them, the people that are getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to run them, don't have to live in them. Give the power back to the people, keep Section 9, and we're advocating and demanding that Section 9 NYCHA be fully funded. Not RAD, not PACT. No one wants to fix the situation, but wants to come in with all of these other things instead of fixing NYCHA Section 9. Thank you.
Ms. Grant. Thank you. Thank you so much for your testimony. You did Councilmember Barron proud because we absolutely 100% agree with that. We appreciate you and your advocacy.
The next member of the public on Zoom, Sharon McLennan Weir, should be receiving an invitation.
Can you hear me?
We can.
You can hear me? Great. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Sharon McLennan Weir. I am the Executive Director for the Center for Independence of the Disabled, New York, Sydney. I'm here to advocate for the over 1 million people with disabilities that are living in New York City. Sydney has approximately 90% of people that we serve with disabilities are living in public housing. They are living in NYCHA housing. They have chronic disabilities. They have sensory disabilities. They have autoimmune disabilities. The housing that they are living in further exacerbate their disabilities. I'm here to advocate for funding to fix the NYCHA problem. We have consumers calling us every day to talk about how they are exposed to mold, how they experience roaches, how they experience rats, how they don't have hot water, how they don't have heat, how they're afraid to leave their apartment because they cannot see, because they cannot hear, because they have a mobility device. They're afraid of being attacked in elevators, or they're in buildings where they can't even leave their homes because elevators are not in working order. I'm here to advocate for people to understand that having a disability can happen to anyone. And because most people with disabilities have low income, because of the disparities and the barriers to employment and to the environment, they have no other choice but to live in public housing. It is imperative as a community, as a society, that we provide comfortable and appropriate housing for each and every individual. I'm also here to advocate for funding for Sydney to help our clients and those individuals who need an attorney to help them in navigating the system for the right to counsel. Sydney has many people with disabilities who are unable to find appropriate counsel to address their housing issues. Our consumers are afraid to enter into the shelter system or to enter into the streets. It's imperative that you work with nonprofits, especially Sydney, who's advocating for people with disabilities so that they have safe and healthy housing in New York City. I thank you for listening, and I just also want you to understand that we all have friends and family that are affected by disabilities, and it's imperative for us to make sure that the funding is appropriate for New York City housing. I'm ready to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Weir, for your testimony. Can you tell me, have you seen the conditions for disabled residents in NYCHA improve or deteriorate? And I know it's a very general question, but I'd love to hear what your experience has been with the folks that you work with.
Well, all I can say, based on the numerous calls that Sydney receives on a daily basis, is that the complaints are, there are many, many complaints. The housing conditions are deplorable. What really kills me is that we're here to advocate. We want to teach our consumers how to speak up and go through the right procedures to put their claims in. To put their claims in, to do the right thing in advocating for what they need in their apartments, but they're not getting it. Further, to hear consumers acquire additional disabilities. Maybe they had a sensory disability and now they have respiratory issues because they have water and mold problems. Right. We also have children who are not doing well in the school system because of the constant exposure to mold and to lead. This is a problem. And we understand that NYCHA needs funding. We understand that they need help. But what do you say to a mother that has a child that could excel if they just lived in a different place and there's no other choice or no other place for them to live based on their income? So I hope I answered your question, but basically the conditions have not improved.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your testimony. And I know we all need to do better, specifically with our community members. And in terms of communication, I know this is an ongoing struggle that NYCHA has not been able to ensure that it meets the needs of all its disabled community members in terms of how it communicates.
Yes.
Would love to talk to you more offline.
I just wanted to add, I'm sorry, Chair, I just wanted to add, the right to counsel is very important as well. And a lot of our constituents are saying that they cannot find an attorney to appropriately address their disability-related accommodations that they may need in that process. So it's really imperative that we further increase the funding to right to counsel, because Sydney works with people with disabilities. We know the accommodations, we know what they need. So I just want to also keep that on your radar.
Yeah, thank you for that. I can't agree with you more. It is critical for our city to make sure that we provide all the tools necessary to our residents so that they can protect themselves. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I think once again, I just want to extend all my thanks to everyone for being here today, especially to all the residents and to the staff who helped to prepare. While it is shocking to learn that NYCHA has 3 weeks worth of reserves left in the bank, I am not surprised, and I'm sure none of my colleagues that joined today are surprised and deeply concerned. For a decade, every level of government has failed the residents of public housing. For decades, our elected officials have treated NYCHA residents like second-class citizens, divesting to the point where thousands of units and sometimes whole buildings have become uninhabitable. This is most certainly a disgrace. New York is the wealthiest city, not just in the country, but in the world. and we continue to let our working class suffer the indignities of crumbling public housing stocks. And worse, we again and again turn to privatization in hopes that we can fix what we deliberately broke. Privatization has never been a good long-term solution, and if the past few decades of growing inequity have taught us anything. But we continue to refuse to do the hard work of fixing antiquated bureaucratic structures designed to disenfranchise and more. We refuse to do the hard work of care. We must care for our public housing residents, and I plan to reflect that in my work on this year's budget. I will take what was learned here today and work alongside our colleagues, residents, and advocates to help restore dignified living conditions to our most vulnerable. Thank you so much for being here today. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.